think we're ready now. Let me call the meeting to order. Let's start with a roll call, Angela.
Okay, Marcia Aaron. Here. Connie Balmer. Here. Peter Bragdon.
Here.
Andrew Collis is absent. Ann Curry is absent. Alan Ford.
Here.
Joe Gagne.
Here.
Ross Carey is absent. Chair Lillis.
Here.
Laura Lee McIntyre.
Here.
Jimmy Murray.
Here.
Will Postian.
Here.
Vice Chair Ralph. Here. President Schill.
Here.
Mary Wilcox.
Here.
Great, thank you. We obviously have a quorum, which is the important thing. Let's deal first with the minutes from the September meeting. Is there a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second, are there any comments or adjustments required in anyone's opinion? Okay, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Let's go to the public comment session. And we have 4 people signed up. And if I mispronounce a name, I apologize in advance. Matthew Gola. Welcome.
Matthew, if you want to give those to Jennifer, she can help you distribute them.
And sit by a microphone, any one of those, I think. That'd be perfect. Welcome again.
Hello. So my name is Matt Gola. Nice to meet everybody. I'm here today to talk about the need for financial literacy at our university. I do think that the student debt crisis is causing kind of insurmountable problems for the next generation of students, and we're going to need more education than just our standard 4-year curriculum in order to help us create the financial capital necessary to pay off debts and start a future for ourselves. So I'm here today as a 501c3 potential in order to advocate for and organize financial literacy workshops for all students. So this wouldn't be a thing that I'm asking the university in order to fund. This would be a network of people who are in the financial professions who can provide some sort of workshop, maybe just 20 or 40 minutes for all students so that they can understand the basics of personal finance as well as get some sort of specialty education. So if they're interested in entrepreneurship, they can meet with somebody who's a successful entrepreneur for 20 minutes. If they're interested in real estate investing, then they can meet with the real estate investment club for 20 minutes, etc. So every single student would have an opportunity to learn the basics of personal finance and learn some sort of specialty just because they're coming to the University of Oregon. Not because I'm here, but because the board themselves and the educators at the University of Oregon agree that this would be a good thing for the future and for the students themselves.
Terrific, thank you.
So here today, I'm mostly looking for your support. You know, this is going to take a few rubber stamps to get into the system. I've talked to the Lane student government, and I've also talked to the University of Oregon student government, and I can tell that each university is going to require a different approach in order to get financial education to all students. For Lane, it doesn't make much sense to do something at orientation because it's more of a community college structure, but it does make sense to put it in as a degree requirement. For the University of Oregon, that's a bit more lofty because our degree requirements are pretty extensive and people struggle to get it done in 4 years already. So I do think the best approach at the University of Oregon would have some sort of 40-minute workshop like the sexual health workshop, like the drugs and alcohol workshop, just something that you have to do early on in your degree program in order to continue registering for classes. And it shouldn't be something that takes you out of your way. It should be something that really propels your future and allows you to have a stable financial life and not get trapped in debt early on.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you all for hearing me. If anybody is interested, I really negligently didn't put my email address on the form I just gave you. But please reach out, and I'd love to just have some sort of liaison that can help guide this program through the system, getting the rubber stamps where they belong. That way this can really get going as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to the second person in a moment, but I do have a question for somebody, the provost. Or is there any kind of course called financial literacy at the university?
Probably there might be something in the business school, but I'll have to look into that. But certainly this is something that we could explore and see how we could do it and it'll be good for us to be in touch about it.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, and just one thing I neglected to add for the notion of time was that we do have a financial flight plan through the financial aid office, but the struggle is that it only served 8 students this last semester. So, I mean, it's really not getting used. So some other program really does need to push forward for this.
Okay, great. Okay, the next speaker is Jack Dresser. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm a retired psychologist and behavioral research scientist from Oregon Research Institute. You know, last May, the U of O Student Senate passed a measure sponsored by Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights, with 30 co-sponsoring student groups to blacklist products and divest from companies that participate in the illegal Israeli occupation of Palestine. I applaud these students. And you should be very proud of them, President Schill, since they have apparently listened closely to you. You speak a great deal about equity and inclusion, and that's exactly what they advocate for the people of Palestine. Palestine was far from a land without a people, but was the western arc of the Fertile Crescent, highly developed since ancient times by diverse peoples. Jews were not driven out by the Romans, according to Israeli historian Shlomo Zahn, but largely converted to Christianity under the Crusade in the 4th century and then to Islam in the 7th century following the Arab conquest. So these people have lived there, cultivated the land, planted olive groves now ancient, built cities, and conducted international commerce for many centuries. In World War I, they fought with the British to liberate their own land from the Ottoman Empire, and then found themselves betrayed and disarmed by the British during the Mandate period, which left them helpless against Zionist terrorism and ethnic cleansing in 1948. Most were driven into refugee camps and never allowed to return, violating basic international law. Those remaining lived under martial law for 18 years before the rest of Palestine was seized in the 1967 preemptive war, falsely claimed as defensive, and have lived ever since under military occupation or an array of 65 discriminatory laws within Israel. 45 UN resolutions to bring Israel into compliance with international law have been vetoed by the United States, which is why BDS is needed to bypass this roadblock. This is equity and inclusion denial by violence for 70 years. So I'm puzzled and disappointed with you, President Schill. You rebuked students for being, quote, divisive when they were in fact asserting the very values you encourage. And what's wrong with divisive? Aren't college students open to free inquiry to move beyond what they think they already know? I'm also concerned with how this history is now taught in the Judaic Studies Department, falsely framing it as a, quote, competition between two national movements. The subject was previously taught with academic integrity by Professor Ken Debevoise in the Political Science and History departments, based upon Israeli archives now declassified 40 years, United Nations Palestinian, British, and U.S. consular documents, detailed reporting by Middle East correspondents, and international legal authorities. This curriculum should be restored and in a different department.
Thank you very much. And you each got information from Jack? Okay, let's move to the third speaker, Joe Tyndall. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, my name's Joe Tyndall. I'm now a student. Having turned 65, I get to enjoy the generous U of O policy inviting seniors, the white-haired variety, to audit classes. Over the summer, I took chemistry and this fall physics. What troubles me is how much social justice has infected classrooms, even in STEM subjects. Now that I am a student, I pondered whether I would speak here again. Opposition to social justice paints a target on my back, but if good people self-censor, the bullies win. And students I have spoken with are intimidated. One incident of many, I will relate, began with arriving early for class, taking a seat at a table and studying. I was confronted by a female student who told me I could not sit there. She was nasty, entitled, and bullying. As I remained where I was, she got nastier, but failed to give a valid reason why I should move. I eventually moved away from her. The following day, the teaching assistant confronted me, stating that I had been reported to campus authorities and that this student had been granted an accommodation for infirmities. I replied that she should have stated that and should have done so in a civil manner. He repeated the same information, saying that I had a duty to submit to her demand. I told him I had done nothing wrong and would not apologize. He then said, "You're a white male. You need to check your privilege." I asked him if he realized how racist and sexist that statement was. Our conversation continued for an hour. The final idea I attempted to establish was that he is training at the U of O to earn a lofty place in a hierarchy of competence. He rejected this observation, claiming all hierarchies are rigid, corrupt, oppressive, based on power, and need to be smashed. That includes this board of trustees, which makes all of you evil. In his words, they will be coming for you. The social justice nonsense you allow to dominate this campus is a threat to Western liberal democracy. Social justice is an authoritarian, self-contradictory mix of postmodernism, social and economic Marxism, man-hating feminism, and intersectionality. Social justice labels any disagreement as hate. Its narrative fails when debated, so it resorts to relational and increasingly to physical violence. The consequences of indoctrinating this insanity dominates the news nationally and worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. The next speaker is David Eigel, I think. Eigel, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm back again, and just to give you a little update, I can't really do too much in just a few minutes, but I did want to bring something to your attention, or a point or two. One is, in the spring of 2018, I made an offer to every regular University of Oregon History Department faculty member. This included Professor Wiesiger. My offer of a $25,000 prize for the successful defense of the Dunn report has produced no expression of interest by Professor Wiesiger or any other member of the department. Incidentally, I did a little additional research. The very busy man, Professor Dunn, the only time he would have had time to be involved with a fraternal order of any degree would have been, this new fraternal order would have been in the summers. In the summer of 1923, he was actually out of the country leading a tour of the very Catholic countries of France and Italy, where how he managed to run the Klan from there while he was leading a tour, and why a Catholic-hating man would do that, I don't know, but maybe there's something wrong with the report. Subsequent to my last appearance at the trustees meeting, I left a message for Ms. Ralph regarding the denaming. I subsequently heard back not from Ms. Ralph, but from an assistant of hers who explained that she was out of state. Ms. Ralph and I are both Rotarians. I stated to her assistant, the first test of Rotarians is it the truth? And that it would be embarrassing for her in Rotarian circles to be involved in promoting fraudulent reports. Subsequently, I received the following email from U of O counsel Kevin Reed. Mr. Eigel, I understand that you have left messages with Geneva Ralph's professional office, threatening some sort of action relating to her business and to the Rotary Club unless she takes action as a member of the University of Oregon's Board of Trustees. At Ms. Ralph's request, I'm responding to you if you would like to explain how you believe it is appropriate to threaten a public official's business and philanthropic relations in an effort to obtain a vote you favor. I would be happy to talk with you. My contact information is found below. I responded within the hour. Mr. Reed, it appears to me that you have your facts in error. Whether this is intentional or not, I don't know. I will assume at this point you've been misinformed. If you'll be so kind as to provide me with support, fact-based, for each of the assertions you have made, we will have a basis for discussion. For example, I have no idea what vote you are referring to. In an effort to obtain a vote you favor, What vote are you referring to, Mr. Reed? In all seriousness, I'm aware of anything that I've done that constitutes a threat. Precisely what threat are you referring to, Mr. Reed? 2 days later, I received from Mr. Reed, we have transcribed your remarks to the Board of Trustees as well as the message you left from Ms. Ralph. Your claim of ignorance lacks credibility. You are obviously free to say whatever you choose about Professor Dunn, but I recommend you research the legal definitions of extortion, coercion, and defamation before you communicate again with U of O trustees or publish statements about U of O faculty or trustees. In recent months, I'd approached the University of Oregon and proposed setting up a scholarship fund in Professor Dunn's memory of at least $100,000. I eventually received back communication from Mr. Elstone after he'd done some checking. And he said, "Dear Mr. Eigel, thank you for your interest in supporting the University of Oregon. After consulting with the appropriate university leaders, I have to share with you, we cannot accept the pledge that you have proposed in the name of Frederick Dunn." And then he went on with the usual repetition of the false narrative. And I said, "Dear Mr. Elstone, thank you for your candid response. I would like to respond appropriately. It would be helpful to me in preparing my response if you'd be kind enough to inform me of the identities of the appropriate university leaders you mentioned." Included of the three is Kevin Reed. In other words, rather than acknowledge that a fake history was used to dename a potential $100,000 donation will be discarded. To accept the money and acknowledge the truth would embarrass Mr. Show, but help the U of O. I don't think Mr. Reed's working in the best interests of his client, the University of Oregon. I'll be sending you more materials on this. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, sir. That is the complete list of people who have signed up for public comment. So, seeing no others, I think we'll move on. Let's go to our regular reports. And Maria, do I see you? Oh, yes. Please join us. And all of you received the advance report from Maria. So we haven't seen you since breakfast.
I know, long time no see. Good morning again.
Good morning and welcome.
Once again, thank you so much for coming to the breakfast. I think it was a really great opportunity to get to know all of you and for you all to get to know your students, who are also really important leaders on this campus. So a couple updates. Some of you might have already heard them since I was talking to you all at breakfast, but to kick off fall term, we gave the UO Health Center $19,000 for HIV testing. So it'd be zero out of cost for students. This has been an ongoing project for 3 years, but they ran out of ASUO money from the year that we were over-realized, so we then granted them again money for this year. However, the rate that healthcare kind of inflates over the time is not sustainable to keep track with IFE dollars from our budget, and this actually didn't come out of IFE, it came out of like the personal exec budget. So we encourage the health center to prioritize STD testing and hopefully tack that onto their own IFE. It's kind of hard to say whether or not other presidents would also fund HIV testing. So that's an update. Your students will be covered for that testing. We also are doing really well with the food insecurity initiatives. We have rolled out 3 of the 4 projects so far. We had our first produce drop, which is kind of like a makeshift grocery, like farmer's market, but for free. So students just had to come, show their student ID, and then we're able to grab a bag of fresh produce, which was really helpful. We had about 400 pounds of food delivered, and 80 people showed up within 45 minutes. We ran out of food. So it's clear that we need to expand this. The Ducks Feeding Ducks program has also been successfully rolled out. It's kind of like a system that you register for online, and then you get $10 a month from the U of O to get food in the EMU and other restaurants on campus. That you don't have to prove anything else besides that you're a student and that you have less than $4 in your Duck Bucks account. And We have over 200 people who have applied, and we are like 1/3 of them are already in their 3-month limit. So we have a 3-month limit per term. So it's really great. We're probably going to need to expand. Right now it's only $10, and we can see that it's being used time and time again. So we're hoping to expand that through fundraising. Our tech system, which will be rolled out through the EMU catering once there's an event that like such as today, we had a lot of leftover food. Students could then get a text that says, hey, there's like free food in the Rosewood room, and then students can come and get the food. We're in the beta testing process. It's a little more technical, so it's been taking longer. We initially planned to roll it out fall term, but it wasn't quite up to speed, so hopefully winter term. There's a lot of technical things I don't know about. And then we are also currently working on the proposal for the food pantry move. Do you have a question, Chuck? Oh, okay, you went, sorry. So we're working on the proposal to get the food pantry on campus and secure funding. And I'm looking towards President Schill to help us make that happen. As well as I'm sure you all saw the governor's budget. Very disappointed with the budget, with the 2 budgets that she rolled out. One of them is a cuts budget, and the other is a joke of an investment. So we're hoping at least to stay at 5%. We're going to be focusing on our lobbying efforts in Salem to get state revenue to come through legislators. The unfortunate part is we won't really know the results of that till late June to maybe even next year. But I really would encourage you all to be advocating to get more state revenue. And then also I'd love to see you all at the lobby day, which is May 8th, not March. I put in my report March, I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. I think it'd be really beneficial if students and the board is also advocating for the same thing. And last but not least, next term I will be working with the fundraising department to ensure that we're working on student issues for student achievement, scholarships, and then also to expand our emergency funds, such as the Ducks Feeding Ducks. Is there any questions y'all have? That was a lot. No? Okay.
Any questions for Maria?
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was lovely getting to know all of you this morning.
Great. Thank you very much, Maria. Bill, are you ready? Okay. University Senate report, Bill Harbaugh. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. So this will be a pretty brief report. It's basically just an update on what we talked about in September. Let's see. So these are sort of our goals for the rest of the year. One of the more interesting things, we had a Senate retreat in October. And this was prompted by a retreat that the academic leadership team did. They had Carol Cartwright, who works for the Association of Governing Boards. She's a former university president and now a consultant. And at the academic leadership retreat, it was very interesting process by which she was able to get the deans and the associate deans to sort of lay out in a safe way their concerns with what was happening at the university in terms of administration, control, communications, and so forth. And so Elizabeth Skowron, the Senate Vice President, and I were invited to that retreat, and we were really impressed by how well that process had worked. And so we wanted to do something similar for the Senate. So with the help of the administration, we invited Carol Cartwright back, and she did a day-long series of meetings with the Senate members and various committees and with some of the administrators that we work with. And then a 2-hour retreat at the Senate meeting, where I guess the way to call this is a facilitated conversation, where she had some talking points that had been developed through her meetings with us. And then we divided into tables and talked about these things, and then there was reporting out on that. So a couple interesting things came out of that. I think that people were generally happy with the way the Senate was working, but there are some concerns. One is with the committee structure of the Senate, and I've talked with you before about how The Senate has a complicated committee structure. We have, 4 or 5 core committees that work on curriculum matters and new programs, things like that. We also have a large number of smaller committees that are devoted to, specific interest groups and specific matters. And sometimes those work very well. Sometimes it gets to be a little bit cumbersome. Sometimes there are a lot of people who want to serve on a particular committee, sometimes not so many. One problem that we've been aware of for a long time, but kind of came to the head through this retreat, is that the members of the core committees are often not that involved in the Senate itself. So when things come to the Senate, there's not necessarily 4 or 5 members of that committee there as senators to kind of guide it through the Senate process, and that ends up duplicating some time and effort, and occasionally causes us to have to send things back for clarification and so forth. So we're studying how other Senates operate. There's a wide variety of models out there. I don't think our model is all that unusual. In fact, it's definitely not that unusual, but we're doing what we can do in order to increase the efficiency of the Senate and its committees with that. I should say that we not only want to increase its efficiency, but we want to increase its effectiveness as a voice for shared governance at the university. And so this is another thing that came out of the retreat, that the administration often tries to work around the Senate when it comes to getting input from the faculty on academic matters. And so the example that is relevant at the moment is the committee to reorganize or potentially reorganize the College of Arts and Sciences. One proposal is to split that college into 2 separate colleges, one that would be sciences and night campus, and the other would be humanities and social sciences. That would be a serious reorganization, maybe a very good one, but certainly one that many of the people in the faculty have large stakes in, having spent their careers here and being concerned about what such a reorganization would mean for their teaching and for their fields of study. So I would have hoped that committee would have been organized through the Senate, and that therefore the results that come out of it would have some buy-in from members of the Senate, but that wasn't really done. We have only minimal, I think 2 out of 21 members of the committee, and even though this is a committee that deals with serious academic matters, a minority of the faculty on it, or minority of the members are faculty, most are administrators. So I don't think that worked out very well, but it is what it is, and of course we're committed to work with the committee that we have and make the best of what comes out of that. Another thing that came out of the retreat was similar, the need for having the Senate or elections to determine the membership of committees that deal with hiring, review of academic administrators, deans, and so on, rather than to have these appointed by the administration. And I think the reasons for that are fairly obvious, that if you want to get independent advice about these things, and if you want to get buy-in from the people who are going to have to do the work, you need to have a committee that is really representative of the faculty, and the Senate is that elected body. So we're going to work on that. We've already talked with Mike and Jayanth about that, and we'll work some more on trying to work that out. So then I want to say a few other things. Online sports product management. In the past, you guys have accused the Senate of acting slowly on some of these program reviews, and I just want to point this out. The business school came to us, I think, in mid-September or so with a proposal for this. They had apparently already started enrolling students in it, despite the fact that the online delivery mechanism hadn't been approved. Our accreditors insisted that the program be approved by the Senate before it could actually, enroll students. So we worked with the business school to get that passed very quickly, and they did a great job helping make that possible. Teaching evaluations, Jayanth talked a little bit about that already. I think that's an example of a situation where the Senate and the administration are cooperating very well. We're working with Sierra Dawson from the Provost's office and Lee Rungbarger from Teaching Effectiveness Program. We've now got 2 working groups set up that are testing our new student surveys in classes in, I think, 5 different departments. And we are working to improve what's called peer evaluation, which basically means faculty sitting in on other faculty's classes and looking at their syllabus, looking at their exam questions and the answers and so forth, and evaluating the quality of teaching that way. So the last Senate meeting on Wednesday, we had Ginger Clark from University of Southern California come. She is in the middle of implementing a very similar program at USC. It's kind of an example of convergent evolution. We had never heard of her. She had never heard of us. But we were both working on similar reform efforts for these student evaluations, and we have come up with very similar systems. USC's is stronger in some sense. And this, if there's one takeaway from this debate about student evaluations that you should keep in mind, it's that students are not qualified to evaluate the quality of faculty or teaching. What they are qualified to do is tell us how satisfied they are with the course that they're taking. But that's different, okay, from telling us how much they've learned or how good the teaching was. So you see that very easily in the data, where faculty who get good high student evaluations of teaching tend to give inflated grades. They tend to be male. Female instructors get lower evaluations from students, but actually do a better job of the teaching when we see that. So I was talking about this with the business school, and one of the business school faculty said, well, who cares? It measures student satisfaction, and our students are our customers, so we need to know if they're satisfied. One of the other business school professors said, no, they're not our customers. They're our product. We need to put out a high-quality product. We don't care whether they're satisfied or not. And so I kind of kept out of that particular debate. But I think it's correct that there's this divergence here. On the one hand, we want to have satisfied students. On the other hand, we want to put out high-quality students. And the current teaching evaluation system is doing nothing. In fact, it's harmful to our efforts to put out high-quality students. So we're going to be fixing that, and I think we'll have a new mechanism in place by this coming fall to do that. Just a few last things. Core Ed, we're continuing to work on the Core Ed multicultural requirements. I think you've seen some of that already, and the basic goal there is to get students to take these courses earlier in their academic career. And then a few other things. We're also working on a policy on sexual and romantic relationships between faculty and undergraduates, and also graduate students. There are many faculty who would like to just ban these relationships, but according to our general counsel's office, the law on freedom of association prohibits that. So we are going to propose a ban that will be restricted to banning these relationships where the faculty member has an evaluative role over the student, as teaching a class or advising them on their PhD and so forth. That seems to be the strongest thing that we can do under the current interpretation of the law. So that's the main things that the Senate is working on, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Professor Harbaugh? Yeah. Go.
As far as the teaching evaluations, can you give a little context? How long have the existing evaluations been in place? And obviously the Senate and you have belief that we could have a better system.
Yeah.
How did the student body feel about our current system and your initiative?
Do you want to answer that question? Because you were part of a lot of that.
Well, yeah, no, I've talked with you a couple times about the reform. I think what they're doing is, I don't know exactly the direction you've taken most recently.
Pretty much what you were saying in terms of midterm evaluations, get rid of the numbers.
Yeah, I think it's going to be helpful, especially adding a midterm evaluation, just so professors can see where adjustments need to be made. I was curious about the comment you made about students not being able to judge or comment on professors' ability, or not necessarily ability, but how much they've learned, because I feel like students are definitely adequate to be able to address how much they've learned. I do agree that current system is more of a, for lack of a better way to put it, popularity contest. I think you'd agree. But I think that commenting on how much you've learned and what the intent of the class was at the end is definitely something that I feel like I'd be able and comfortable to speak to.
So I'm not sure I agree in general that students are able to do that. I mean, you may be an exception, but what I think students are competent to do is to explain what happened in the class. And so the new evaluations will be focused on asking students about specific teaching practices. So did the professor get your assignments back in time? You know, was there engagement in the lectures? Those sorts of questions. And the evidence is that students can accurately report that information. But the evidence on these evaluations is just overwhelming, that they are completely uncorrelated with what students are actually learning.
Is that based off of our current format?
That's our current format. We're taking sort of a leap of faith, hoping that this new format will do better. It can't do any worse. So,
is there going to be an element to address whether you feel like you learned?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. We'll certainly ask that question. I'm being a little snippy. Sorry.
No, you're good. Well, the only reason I ask about it is because I'm taking a course right now, and I was talking to a couple people yesterday, and I was saying how I don't think I could necessarily right now pinpoint what the point of the class was, and I think that that's partially because the professor, and he didn't necessarily do a good job of laying out the class in a way that was...
Yeah, okay, so now I understand your question better. So actually that is one of the specific focuses of the new evaluations that is not present in the old evaluations, is that we will ask the students, were the learning objectives of the course clearly explained, and did the professor,
Great.
get you through those learning objectives. We'll also ask more specific questions about how much time you spent, reading and doing problem sets and so forth.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yep.
I'd like to make an important clarification. The online sports product management program did not enroll anyone prematurely. What they did was they advertised the program pending approval.
Yeah,
Just thought I should clarify that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Professor Harbaugh?
Just one final, back to the evaluations, how much weight do the student input have in the overall teacher evaluation, and what percentage of students actually do submit
Complete
evaluations?
them. Yeah. So that's a great question. At USC, originally, their provost looked at the new research on these evaluations and said, these are biased against women. They don't measure student learning. Why the hell are we collecting this information? And he wanted to just end it right there. Eventually, they worked out a compromise where their student evaluations, I really shouldn't be calling these student evaluations, their student satisfaction surveys will be used as part of the evaluation of faculty. It will be used as a measure of student satisfaction. Our current evaluations, to answer your question, one of the things that the students don't like about them is that they're pressured to complete them. And that happens because their grades are withheld for a week or two unless they complete the evaluations. So you can imagine how high quality data you get from that process. Yes, you get a high response rate. It's all noise. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Bill, once again, thank you for the advance report. It's very helpful.
Thanks.
Okay, we heard the provost report yesterday. So is there do you want to make any additional comments?
No, I think Mike is going to make some comments related to the CAS task force.
Yep.
And so that was I think it'll be very important for you to hear what's happening on that count.
Okay.
But I'm good to go.
Well, I would never skip President Schill's comments, so are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
So, normally I would have gone over a bunch of topics that are going to be covered separately in today's meeting, like, our enrollment, student success, faculty hiring, budgeting. You're hearing all about those. Also, tuition setting, we're going to have a report on the legislative session and the night campus coming up. So I'm only going to really talk about 3 topics today. In my report, one is going to be the CAS task force. Second is briefly talk a little bit about the data science program that we're putting together, as well as the third thing will be a little bit about Title IX and some things that are happening in Washington. So let me start with CAS. So as you know, earlier this year, Andrew Marcus announced that he was going to step down as dean at the end of this quarter, really very shortly, in a few weeks rather. I'm immensely grateful, as I know all of you are, to Andrew for his service and for his passion for the arts and sciences. And Andrew, will obviously continue to be a member of our community even when he's no longer dean of CAS. Andrew's stepping down gave us an opportunity, since we were going to do a new search for dean of CAS, to think a little bit about structure of CAS. CAS is obviously the heart of the university. It's by far and away the largest academic entity on campus. Last year, it accounted for 2/3 of all credit hours and received more than half of all of our general fund allocated to the schools and colleges. That's where our students take their core education, and where people who don't have majors are anchored until they select their majors. So the question that we wanted to answer is, during this period of transition for CAS, is whether the college is of the appropriate size and scope. Is this optimal, the current situation? Should it stay one college, be split into 2 along the lines that Bill suggested, maybe 3 colleges? What is the right way of doing this? And what would the changes, these various options for structural change, mean for serving the needs of our students, for serving the other colleges, which would be impacted, the other colleges and schools on campus, also interdisciplinary collaboration, and our overall aspirations for excellence at the university. So what we decided to do was we decided to put together a task force, which is going to be an advisory task force to Giant and to me. We appointed 22 people onto the task force, so it's a pretty large task force. We are really fortunate that Karen Ford has agreed to chair it. As you know, Karen is the Senior Divisional Dean for the Humanities. The group is made up largely of faculty members and staff from the natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities in CAS, as well as 1 student, Brad Shelton, 2 deans, Juan Carlos Moreira, and Gabe Paquette, our new dean of the Honors College. And we're really excited about getting it started. Needless to say, whenever you talk about a new structure for the university, or really any major change at the university, you create some uncertainty and some discomfort from people who are used to doing things the way they're doing them. And so what we've had is a significant amount of uncertainty and insecurity, particularly from members of CAS. And some faculty members are pretty well convinced that Giant and I, that we already know what we want to do, and that this task force has really been put into place to effectuate our plans. I can, just very honestly say that is not accurate, and I've told the faculty that. I'm not sure how many times I can keep telling them that and get them to believe me. I actually don't have any priors on this. I just think that now's the right time. Every now and then it's a good time to sort of think about what you're doing. And, what we've asked the task force to do is not to make a recommendation to us, but really just to assess the pros and the cons and of each structure. And then we're hoping that they'll be done by April 15th. Then Giant and I we'll be discussing this. We'll probably come back and talk to the board about the task force results and our views on it before making any changes. I'm really very, very grateful to Karen for chairing the task force. As you know, Karen also, she's being punished for being effective. She did the Honors College task force, which has really put the Honors College on a trajectory of ever greater excellence. And I'm also really very pleased with the members of the task force. And lastly, just once again, I want to thank Andrew Marcus, who has, served with grace and commitment and really thoughtfulness and vision with the university, and in his role as dean and as interim dean during that period before he was appointed as the permanent dean of CAS. So that's number one. Number two is I'm excited to announce that the data science initiative has moved to the next step of implementation. Biology professor Bill Cresco has been appointed the founding director of the data science program, and he's going to be working with faculty, staff, and students across the campus and with the steering committee of campus leadership to create and grow the research and educational components of this. So this is equally important both in the research side and on the teaching side. And what we know is that data is incredibly growing in importance to both how we do research here, but also what people expect from our students when they go out and get jobs. So whether it's environmental data, business analytics, biomedical data science, and the data science of social and interactions and social impacts, it affects every part of our university. So we're really excited about seeing this move forward. Right now, the work is being informed by the work of the Data Science Visioning Committee. This group has developed a comprehensive plan for how we go about thinking about the data science program. Giant and I approved the recommendation earlier for this process, and we're really excited as data science moves forward at the university. As some of you remember, I provided seed funding for this initiative. It's one of the first investments that I made from the anonymous $50 million gift that we received, and we're really excited to see it move forward. And I think it's going to be a major move forward for the University of Oregon. Now, I will say it's not going to be the easiest innovation that we work on here. One of the things when I'm at meetings of presidents of other universities, what we're really finding is that it's incredibly hard to hire top-notch faculty in this area because Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all of these companies are hiring the same people that we want to hire. So it's sort of ironic, when I go to a meeting and I hear Carnegie Mellon complaining that they're losing their best faculty to private industry. So we really do need to be both creative about what we're doing and also strategic in what we're doing, and also understanding what we can be excellent in and what we can't be excellent in, and maybe make some decisions not to try certain things that we can't succeed in. And so that's going to be part of what Bill is thinking through with Giant and with the committee structure. Finally, last thing I want to talk about today is our sexual violence, sexual harassment, violence on campus in relationship to recent announcements coming out of the Department of Education in D.C. As you know, Title IX is the federal law that requires public schools and universities to provide equal access to education regardless of gender, and ensures and requires us to ensure that survivors of gender-based discrimination, harassment, and violence are able to continue in school and flourish. So last month, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos proposed an overhaul of rules for how schools handle allegations of sexual violence and harassment under Title IX. These proposed changes are now officially out for public comment. The 60-day period is going to end on January 28th. Now, these proposals have raised concerns across college campuses, including across our campus. We engage with many other institutions across the state and nationally. We're working on reviewing the proposed changes and providing commentary to the Department of Education. We remain committed, needless to say, to our students, our faculty, and our staff. We want to ensure that they all feel safe and that they're engaged in all of our facilities, programs, and activities in a way that is free from gender bias. And we're going to continue our efforts that we've been making for a number of years to reduce sexual assault, misconduct, discrimination, and harassment, as well as assisting in innovating in prevention and investigation. Now, the proposed rules that have come out of the Department of Education don't change our mission to ensure that all individuals enjoy equal access to their educational opportunities. Some of them, however, do change some of the processes, and some don't. So, for example, our initial assessment by our General Counsel and Title IX Coordinator, Darcy Heroy, suggests that many of our proposed rules are consistent with the framework set forth by the Department of Education. At the same time, if it's finalized, if the new rules are finalized, we will have to consider some changes. So let me start with the most simple, the thing that gets talked about the most, our standard of proof. We currently use a preponderance of the evidence standard or burden. That will not likely change under the rules. You get a choice between that and a more stringent standard of proof, and we have no desire to change that at the moment. Some of the nuts and bolts, though, of how the process works might have to change to become consistent with the federal rules. For example, we may have to hold live hearings with cross-examination conducted by advisors based upon the proposal as it's now written. That currently doesn't happen. We might also have to allow for different types and methods of questioning and information review by the parties involved. There may be changes as well in terms of how this all works, and so we're reviewing that and going through that right now. Now, some of the changes, not all of the changes are negative. Some of the changes could be positive in allowing survivors greater autonomy in choosing whether to move forward with a formal conduct process or going through different alternative dispute resolutions. Now it's really just one path, and what we know is some people who are survivors choose not to go down that path because it's either too onerous or they're concerned about it. But this allows the new rules allow alternative processes. They also give greater clarity on the expectations of support and interim measures provided to both complainants and respondents. Overall, it's a mixed bag, and there's positive and negatives for both parties. And in general, the rules or the proposed rules lean heavily towards protections for respondents, and that's one of the major changes. So the bottom line is that our Title IX experts are analyzing the information, trying to come up with a response by January. But one thing that is, I want to say emphatically, is that it doesn't change our commitment, doesn't change our intent to improve and constantly improve our response to Title IX, allegations of Title IX violations, to prevent sexual violence on campus and off campus, the adjudication process, a fair adjudication process, and the making sure that everyone is able to proceed and flourish here at the University of Oregon. Now, one other note before I finish is the University of Oregon, along with 33 other institutions, will take part in the AAU's Sexual Assault Campus Climate Survey in late winter and early spring of this year. Many of you remember we participated in one of these surveys in 2015. It was actually very helpful. It gave us benchmark information to sort of see how whether what was happening on our campus was different from other campuses that are similar to ours around the country. Students are going to receive more information about the survey next term, and we're actually looking forward to getting the results of that survey to enable us to continue our efforts to make our campus safe and a place where everyone can do well. So with that, I'm done with my report. I'm happy to take any questions about these issues, about anything that you're hearing in the meetings, about Giants report, anything you'd like to talk about, or we'll just move on.
Any questions from?
In your consideration of CAS, are we learning from what's happening around the country at peer universities? I have to believe many other universities are dealing with this. And
yes.
Yes.
So we are going to be providing the task force with supporting information, research that we're digging up of various task forces at other universities and what they encountered, because this sort of model of a behemoth, College of Arts and Sciences exists on lots of campuses, and there's been some breakups at certain places. Some have kept it together. So there is some literature out there, similar task forces.
Right.
So they'll have the benefit of that. Obviously, University of Oregon has a different history. We have a different structure. We're missing some parts, like an engineering school, medical school, makes us look a little different from many of these universities. So we have to really, and our cost structure is different. And so we're not going to be dictated to by those, but we need to understand we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel where there's experience elsewhere.
Along those same lines, I understand that the task force will be putting together a list of pros and cons, not a recommendation, but pros and cons. I think that's a really good way to get robust input and discussion. What are some of the priorities that leadership on campus will be thinking about as they're sort of weighing the pros and cons? Certainly there will be things that will be prioritized. Is that a premature question at this point, or are there some things that are clearly priorities, regardless of what the ultimate outcome is, that you and the provost and other campus leaders will be considering?
So we're going to put together a bit of a memo of some sort, which will go through some of the considerations that we'd like the committee to, or questions that we'd like the committee to answer as they go through the process. The task force will come up with its own as it gets more deeply enmeshed in the topic area. When I think about it, I think about, it's a typical question that, certainly in law, in teaching law, you always have the same issue with federal systems versus local systems. Where are you most responsive to the people that you're trying to be responsive to in big entities or in smaller entities? So, for example, when one of the questions that I think needs to be addressed is, in CAS you have faculty members who have different types of not different types of appointments, but different types of faculty positions, even though they're all the same statutory faculty. For example, a humanities professor, what they do looks quite different from a natural science professor's, both in terms of loads, in terms of research, and are we able to accommodate those differences in a big organization, or do you end up with a lowest common denominator approach? Are you able to allow people to be nimble and to be pursuing, what is appropriate for their professions? And so that's a question that we want to resolve. That might be on the argument. Generally, that sort of question is tending towards smaller units that could be more specialized to the needs of the people in those units. At the same time, one of the things that's happened in, as you know, Laura Lee, in your school in particular, it does this, is we have moved in academics to a much more interdisciplinary approach to research and to teaching. And what you don't want to do is, by having a bigger entity, you reduce barriers to be able to move from one area to another area rather than having silos up. And so we want to make sure that if we were to make a change, that we don't set up barriers where it's harder for some areas, and in particular, the areas that you might think about are, so if we were to move, say, the sciences to a separate college of science, there are some disciplines like anthropology, psychology, linguistics that tend to branch across. And what you don't want is, say, you can always go to the dean of the CAS and say, make us all cooperate, as opposed to, we've got a dean over here and a dean over here. It just becomes a coordination problem. So all of those things, those are two considerations that are very strong in my mind. And also there's, we don't want cost to be a major consideration in this. It might mean, though, that this becomes infeasible if we were to change the structure, if it adds tremendously to costs and adds to more administration, that sort of thing. We might not be able to afford it, even if it's a good idea. And so we really have to, we have some indication that that's not going to be the case, but the committee needs to assess that. Is that helpful in terms of some of the considerations?
Yeah.
Any other questions for, yes?
I was going to ask if there was going to be a budgetary review, so it sounds like there will be as part of this.
Yes, Brad is going to work with the task force on developing numbers. We actually have a subcommittee. Brad is on the task force, and then there's a subcommittee of financial officers who are going to be developing information that will help inform the task force.
Great. And then, completely separate topic, on the survey, I assume we'll be able to benchmark ourselves against the other AAUs, the student survey?
Yes. So
and then will you be presenting back to us what you learn? Sure.
So we should probably get you the older one. So the 2015 was also benchmarked, and it's public. And so you can actually see the data. People can use the data, and you can see how we stack up on certain questions compared to other universities. I mean, the overall incidence that was reflected in the early survey sort of had us toward the middle of the pack in terms of the incidence of sexual violence. I mean, way too high for anyone to feel comfort. I mean, this is one where, to be like, we sometimes say we'd like to be more like the typical AAU in terms of many of our measures and our funding. This is one where you'd like to be not like the typical AAU and be over on one of the tails, where you're having much less sexual violence.
Only on one of the tails.
Only on one of the tails.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just curious about, so I imagine leadership decisions and timelines for hiring will be halted until we decide which direction we're going to go with College of Arts and Sciences, like in terms of deans. We'll wait until we know which direction we're going.
Yes, so Bruce Blonigan has agreed to serve as acting dean of CAS. The way I see the likely timing of this, we will make a decision. We'll get the task force result, make a decision as to how we want to proceed, and then with that information, next year launch a search for the dean of CAS or the dean of whatever turns into whatever these entities might be. But we want to hold that back until we know.
Perfect. Thank you.
With the data science initiative and the ongoing competition that we have with other institutions in the private sector, is there any efforts underway to collaborate maybe in some fashion with the private sector? I don't know what that may be, but these companies are also making investments in some of the universities. So, is there that potential?
So we are increasingly exploring ways to collaborate with private universities in terms of research in particular, but not just research. And we've just appointed Tina Goldberg, who is going to be helping us think through partnerships with the universities, some on research side, some on student internship side, so all of that. And on the night campus, one of the things we're building the night campus with the idea that we will be able to have entrepreneurial spaces, which will either be composed of our spin-out companies, but also bringing in partners from private industry. Now, whether you can have faculty members who have one foot in, say Google and one foot in the university, that becomes a little complicated for intellectual property reasons and more on their side than maybe on our side. But, I don't think there's any, as long as we're meeting our ethical obligations, as long as we're meeting our educational obligations, I'm open to all sorts of possibilities. The other place where data science is going to be, so part of I think what Bill would tell you is one of the, and Giant, you can correct me, because this is such a competitive area, and because we're starting a little late, right? You have to pick your battles. You have to pick where you want to get really good, and you have to pick where you have a comparative advantage. So the night campus will be helpful because the night campus will be hiring some of these people. So that will be areas that we choose for the night. One area is areas we choose for the night campus. Also, our emerging partnerships with OHSU could really be powerful. So, for example, there's discussions now about degree programs, potential degree programs with OHSU, very early stages, and discussions about research collaborations, potentially joint hiring, but really early days for all of that. But that would give us the ability to have a comparative advantage between linking both schools, the resources of both schools together to be able to attract people. And you'd want to pick like the best of OHSU and best of the University of Oregon. But data is all over the place, right? People, humanities are interested in data. Social sciences, for sure, interested in data. Education schools already doing tons of stuff in data. So, Giant, I think you have 8 searches this year for data.
That's correct.
So, we're jumping in, but we're not waiting, but we're also looking for opportunities.
Yeah, an exciting area that we are actually looking into is biomedical data science, because that does fit into the night campus, and OHSU is really interested in working with us on it, and we're even thinking of maybe having a joint program of some kind and making a joint hire if that's feasible. And we are also trying hard to advance an educational program in data science, because we could do it both at the undergraduate and at the graduate level, and certainly it's an area that society needs. And if you take all the strengths we have on campus and the hiring that we are doing, we could position ourselves as a real player in that field. And we are also thinking of leveraging the online presence that we will have in the data science arena. So the idea is that we do want to work with industries. We had a visit with Microsoft, and we are getting some very helpful advice from them. So there are many things going on simultaneously, and I think in about a year or so, there will be a lot to report, and it's all looking very promising right now.
And this is also an area, Bill was talking earlier about ways in which this, searching for ways in which we can make our the relationship between the administration and the Senate a little more healthy and productive. This is an area I think that we both see as, thinking about what are the areas, the academic areas, the curricular areas of the university that we could grow. Because a lot of these things are going to be new degrees, new degree in data science, biomedical engineering, all of that we're going to need and want the Senate to be part of as we move forward. So, I think it's an exciting time for the university. I think and one of the things that I would like to see us do is, and this is a discussion that we've had a couple times, is, we are going to grow our campus, and I think it's all too easy for some of us to say, okay, Roger, just grow our campus. Okay, it's your problem. Here's the scholarship money, go do it. But part of doing that is not just Roger generating people to come here, but increasing the demand for the school by looking at what we're offering and looking and making sure that our curriculum, that the things that we're offering are not sort of just tied to the past, that what we're doing is we're innovating and we're out there with good programs, not necessarily flashy or insubstantial programs, but really good programs that students will recognize have value and allow them to achieve their aspirations. And so I really want us to be thinking ahead in that way. And I think that we're pretty early days in that, and we need to move forward with it.
Anything else for President Schill? We're going to hear later today from Bob Goldberg relative to the night campus, and one of the things that was very attractive when you were successful in recruiting him was his history of very good connections with the private sector on a variety of research and academic affairs. Okay, thank you, President Schill. So let's move on to, we have 3 resolutions coming out of the Finance and Facilities Committee. Ross Carey is not here, but Peter has agreed to stand in for him. And Peter, these are 3 motions coming to us as seconded motions, so we will just vote on them, but it would be helpful if you could give a one or partial one-sentence explanation of each of them.
I will limit myself to 30 minutes.
30 minutes per resolution.
Actually, if you could tell Ross it took me an hour. Yeah, so the first one is, and I think everybody was here for these yesterday, so the first one is the multi-year licensing agreement with Fanatics Apparel to increase the amount of revenue coming to the university.
And you recall this is the licensing agreement. So let's call for the vote. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And the second
resolution,
one.
Okay.
Sorry, resolution.
Adopted. Go ahead.
The second one is the agreements related to the enhancements for the Matthew Knight Arena, which will be funded entirely by private donations.
And you all recall what those were, I hope? Okay, let's call for the vote. All those in favor of the resolution? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution carries. And the last one?
The last one is accepting a gift of property down in Bandon, which if we don't accept it, I'd like to go down and live on it. I would recommend that we had, but anyway, that's the one.
You recall this is this beautiful 15-acre place down on the coast. So all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. It carries. Thank you very much. I think you did such a wonderful job, Peter, that maybe you have a future as chair of something.
That's a good idea.
We'll discuss that during the break.
We'll discuss. I see. Okay. The next item is government affairs, and are we all here for that? Would it be possible to take like a 2-minute break? I need to make a phone call. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's just adjourn for 2 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay? 2.2 minutes. I have to do a quick phone call. Okay, I apologize for the break, but I couldn't avoid it. So, are we you ready, Michael? No one took me seriously at 2 minutes.
Hey, we're here. There's a like 3x multiplier on any announced time.
I see. Okay. Well, we have the truth tellers here now, the government affairs people, so now we can find out what really is going on.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. It's that time again where we're on the precipice of a long legislative session in Oregon, which will start in January of next year and will end no later than June 30th. And today we're going to provide you a look at the university's proactive legislative agenda, as well as an overview of Governor Brown's recommended budget, which was released last week, and its impact on the U of O and higher education more broadly. I think before we dive into the agenda, it's important to state at the outset that there are lots of things that we still don't know, and we are operating in a political landscape that is changing and can change rapidly, so we have to be nimble with it. So we'll do our best today to answer any and all questions that you have about the budget, our policy agenda, next year's session, or anything else in the state affairs world. I'll hand it off to Hans now to start with the first piece of our agenda around funding.
So, as is typical with each legislative session, our primary focus will be on the Public University Support Fund, which is the largest source of state funding that the university receives. We will be working with the other public universities to secure, in an effort to secure an additional $120 million in the support fund. This would be the funding level necessary for the University of Oregon and other institutions to keep tuition increases at or below 5% for both of the upcoming years of the biennium. In addition to that work, we will also be focusing on an 8.4% increase for state programs. Those are the centers and institutes around campus that receive individual line items of legislative funding. Think the Labor Education Research Center, the Clinical Legal Education Program at the law school, and the Tallwood Design Institute, which is a partnership between OSU and the University of Oregon with our architecture school. We are working to secure sort of just inflationary costs for those programs. On the student scholarship side, we will be focused on advocating for increases in the Oregon Opportunity Grant. This grant was included in the governor's budget, which we will discuss a little later, but it's an important funding tool for the U of O because of how it impacts Pathway Oregon. You all know that Pathway Oregon is a last dollar in program, so the more the state funds the opportunity grant, the more we're able to stretch the funding for the Pathway Oregon program. In addition, we'll be working to secure a full statutory 1% for the sports lottery scholarships. This is a historic stream of funding that the U of O receives about $1 million a year from. It is the only source of state funds for graduate student scholarships and also provides scholarships to many of our student athletes.
On the capital construction project side of things, the university's top project for funding next year is the renovation of Eustis Hall. Many of you have probably taken classes or been in Eustis, and if you've been there recently, you can see it is in need of some critical updates. So we're asking for $54 million, which would be matched by $6 million of institutional funds. This building is the life sciences hub on campus. It houses the Institute of Neuroscience, our zebrafish lab in the basement there serves 3,000 students and faculty members every year, so it's a really critical part of the sciences at the university. And another interesting part of the building is that it is home to a lot of our K-12 pipeline programs and summer STEM programs like SAIL and SPICE. So it's a multi-use building, and it scored very well through the HEC evaluation process of these projects because of its ability to eliminate nearly $19 million of our deferred maintenance backlog on campus. In addition to Eustis, we will partner with the 7 other universities and collectively advocate for $65 million in the Capital Improvement and Renewal Fund. This is a fund that ultimately is divided through a formula at the HEC, but is the state source of funding for deferred maintenance needs, ADA compliance, critical life and safety on campus. So we're asking for $65 million last biennium. Just as to give you a benchmark, we asked for $65 million and got $45. So it's an important piece of funding for deferred maintenance needs on campus. The next 2 slides are the piece of our agenda where we really tried to pursue a strategy for 2019 where we asked the state to invest in areas of the university that it hadn't before, matching areas where legislators had a particular interest, where we'd invited them to events or student presentations, and they created an interest and thought it was really cool and asked for a way that the state could be involved. And so we came up with, there are 4 of these, and it's something that we hope in future sessions to replicate and hopefully are successful next session. So the first one is a state matching fund for the Sustainable City Year program. If you don't know what the Sustainable City Year program is, we embed students and faculty members with a partnering city, county, local government each year and help them solve policy challenges, community problems that they have come to us and said, we want to partner with you. So examples of, we've partnered with the city of Salem, with Lapine, Medford, the city of Springfield. And there are a lot of cities, especially those in more rural areas, that want to partner with us. But because of the cost structure, the university has skin in the game, and then we ask the partnering city to also pay a fee to help for administrative expenses and traveling for students and things like that. And there are cities that want to participate but just can't afford it. And so a state matching fund of $300,000 every biennium would help us expand the program to more cities, especially those on the east side of the mountains.
Libby, after the fact, when these programs have been implemented, when our students have been involved, have those cities been successful in getting additional funding from federal sources, or?
I think that we could probably get Mark Schlossberg up there to answer that specifically. I think one example that is touted is one of the first projects, which was with the city of Salem. Students looked at their wastewater treatment facility and the food packing industry there, and the city of Salem was shipping their waste up to Portland. And students and faculty members looked at that and said, why are you doing that when there are actually infrastructure in the city of Salem to deal with that waste? And so they put forward a plan that ended up saving the city $1 million, $750,000 to $1 million every year. The city went ahead and implemented that, and now have it is a new revenue stream that's ongoing. So it's a representative example, and obviously not every city and project is $1 million a year new revenue stream, but there are lots of examples like that across the state.
Is Salem really grateful to the U of O about that?
They are. They are. In fact, when talking about this bill and this program to legislators over the last couple of months, Representative Clem, who represents the Salem area, I started talking about it, and within the first 30 seconds said, oh yeah, I know that program. The city loved it. I've tried to get them, more places to do it. So there is a recognition and gratefulness for the ideas that came from it. Oregon Institute of Marine Biology. This is our our institute in Charleston, Oregon on the coast, and we are asking the state to invest $500,000 to help us purchase a new ship out there, which we use for teaching, research, and for other sort of community impact and engagement. The Coastal Caucus, which is the group of legislators who represent the coast in Oregon, this is on their agenda. They're very supportive of it. OAMB is near and dear to lots of their hearts, so that is on our agenda. And then moving forward, we have an ask around Shake Alert and earthquake, Shake Alert and Alert Wildfire. This is our Oregon, the multi-hazard network, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but the governor put forward a Resilience 2025 proposal that included $12 million of funds to fully build out Shake Alert by 2023. This is a program that if you haven't heard Doug Toomey and Leland O'Driscoll and others in the Earth Sciences Department talk about the earthquake early warning technology and work that the U of O is involved in with Oregon and California, it's really incredible. And I think just last week with the earthquake in Alaska, we saw the need for this technology and to make sure it's fully built out so that individuals can get these warnings on their phones and really see the full impact of the public safety purpose of this technology. And then lastly, we are asking for $350,000 investment over the biennium in the university's prison education programming. This includes Inside Out. You all heard from Shaul Cohen in September about these programs. They are transformative. We've brought legislators to lots of the graduation ceremonies over the last couple years, and they have an interest in figuring out how does the state invest to not only stabilize funding for this program, but expand it to more prisons across the state.
So the next two items of our agenda are places where the University of Oregon participates in broader conversations in Salem because they impact our campus or our budgets. The first one is cost containment and revenue restructuring. This became, I think, even more central following the release of the governor's budget last week, but we have been very clear with legislative leadership to the extent that there are conversations about how the state can manage and mitigate and control the cost, particularly of PERS and healthcare costs, PEB. We want to be part of those conversations because of the numbers that you all see and reckon with in your day-to-day work. So the U of O will work with other universities to participate as appropriate, continuing to advocate that both of those pieces of the equation need to be happening at the same time. Second, support for the 2021 World Track and Field Championships. The governor's budget includes a continued $5 million investment on top of the lodging tax increase that was approved in 2016 to go toward successful implementation and staging and hosting of that event. So as an event that will be held on the U of O's campus, welcoming the world to Eugene, we will work in partnership with all of the local organizations, the local organizing committee in their efforts to secure that funding in Salem. So in addition to all of the things that we are proactively tracking and going to be advocating for, each session I would describe it as a multitude of opportunities for Libby and I to learn just enough to be dangerous about a wide variety of topics. So there is a partial list in front of you. We track between 600 to 900 bills every session. And I would describe it as there are all of the bills that deal with the day-to-day operations of a university, and then those that a large employer in any region would need to pay attention to. So one example being there was a bill several sessions ago that talked about how you would be able to use pesticides in proximity to daycare centers. We have a daycare center on campus. So there are different varieties of levels of ways that we have to track and understand different pieces of legislation, but there is a non-exhaustive list of things that we will be tracking and engaging with on that slide.
So before diving into the governor's recommended budget, want to touch on advocacy, engagement, the work that we're doing to engage our alumni and supporters including you all. UO Advocates, if you haven't heard of it, is a partnership that GCR and the Alumni Association started several years ago. In August of this year, we launched a new standalone website and sort of doubled down on our efforts to recruit and retain advocates, both grass tops and grassroots. And so we have about 8,000 advocates right now. Since the sort of relaunch in August, I'll say we have secured almost 250 unique new advocates, which maybe doesn't seem like a huge number, but is a big deal for us. And if we got 250 people in the Capitol building to advocate on our agenda, that would be a huge success for us. So, we are continuing to recruit advocates. As Maria said, we have our lobby day on May 8th, and obviously would encourage all of you to attend and sign up to be an advocate, because we'll have lots of digital campaigns and ways to stay informed throughout the legislative session. Then what you see here is what we're calling the Invest in Oregon campaign. This is the work that we do collaboratively with the 7 other institutions, because we get one allocation through the Public University Support Fund. And this gives you a sense of the look and feel of what the Invest in Oregon campaign, that's our operating budget campaign, will be like for next session. And the idea around this is it is a call to action campaign, something that tries to relay urgency and shows that investing in higher education offers opportunity to secure prosperity for all Oregonians. The messages around this, we want them to be simple, practical, easy to digest, and most importantly, we want this Invest in Oregon campaign to establish a storytelling platform for us to highlight student stories and things that are happening on campus every day, the really good things that sometimes we don't get as much of a chance to talk about in Salem. So you will see more of this look and feel as we get closer to January, but just wanted to give you a sense now. So now we will turn and dive into a quick overview of what the governor's recommended budget looked like.
So last week, Governor released her recommended budget for the upcoming session, and we can talk a little bit about the impacts to the university of the overall budget, and then open it up for questions and conversations about any of the topics we've discussed today. So the governor proposed essentially 2 budgets, one that is a base budget that assumes existing resources, and one that is built on a $1.9 billion investment package that would be secured through a combination of additional revenue and cost containment initiatives. In the base budget, universities are flat funded at the existing $736 million in the Public University Support Fund, functionally because of the way that the funding formula works and the way that the allocation is split over the course of the biennium. That would represent a cut to the University of Oregon and all of the universities. In the investment budget, the governor's budget includes at least $120 million increase in the Public University Support Fund, which would be the number, again, required to keep our tuition increases at or below 5% for both years of the biennium.
Hans, question. We're getting such a small piece of that, 120. I realize that's an old formula that's based in the past, but does that also include the community colleges, or is that just the 7 universities?
So the $120 million is just the Public University Support Fund. So in the overall investment budget, I believe the total going to higher education or post-secondary, defined as universities, community colleges, and student financial aid, is about $600 million.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because it does look confusing when you look at the numbers, the $120 million is for 7 campuses for 2 years of the biennium. That $8 million is a year-over-year figure, so we'd see 8 in the first year, we'd probably see 10 or 11 in the next year. But what's really confusing about it is because they give you the dollars for 2 years and they split it out 49% and then 51%, you need to get some money just to even stay steady state. And so that's why it doesn't look quite as much, like we're getting quite as much. But it is for 2 years for 7 campuses.
Thank you.
And you have to remember it goes through a formula, the POSF.
On the state
And
program.
a formula, I always want to say, a formula that does not favor us and puts us at the bottom of the list per student of any university in the state.
I tried to set you up for that.
Right, thank you.
On the state program side, the base budget is flat funding for all of the research centers and institutes and an elimination of the engineering, technology, and sustaining funds. This is formerly known as ETIC. It's a $25 million fund that predominantly flows to institutions that have engineering schools, although the U of O has been a little bit more successful in the last few years about securing some of those additional dollars. In the investment budget, the ETIC, or the Engineering, Technology, and Sustaining Funds, is increased more than doubled to $60 million, and the current service level increase is provided to the state program, so all of the centers and institutes. On the student scholarship side, the base budget includes flat funding for the Oregon Opportunity Grant and eliminating the funding for the Sports Action Lottery. In the investment budget, there is a nearly doubling of the Oregon Opportunity Grant with an investment level of $273 million, and then a $14.1 million funding level for the sports lottery program. This would be a significant increase in terms of the overall dollar amount. I believe the dollar amount last biennium was somewhere around $8 million.
Capital construction in the governor's budget. This slide looks a little different because there was no difference between the base budget and the investment plan, essentially, that the governor put forward as it relates to capital. So she did fund the capital improvement and renewal fund at the full $65 million requested level, and then instead of putting forward a capital project list, which is traditionally what we see in the GRB, essentially, she reserved $225 million of the state's bonding capacity over the biennium for university capital projects and did not include a specific list. She also noted in the budget that the allocation of bonding would not be allocated until February 2020, so the short session. In order to allow the HEC to finish its 10-year capital planning process, that the RFP went out, and I think they have chosen someone and are in process now. So we have our work cut out for us with the legislature. I would encourage you all around this table not to panic at that language. I think it's actually a very good sign that $225 million of the state's bonding capacity was set aside, and now our work begins to make sure that the legislature understands that we need investment in infrastructure in 2019. So that's what the capital picture looks like in her budget. And then
question.
Yes.
I saw it in our capital discussion yesterday. The question is, there was some additional funding we were asking for the Knight Research Center. They only went so far, but I thought there was some discussion in the next biennium and they chip more into the pot. Have they forgotten all that?
So that's been an ongoing conversation with us and President Schill in terms of how we position our requests within the legislative context. The difficult calculus we had to weigh is, do we move forward with the requesting of the remaining amount of the funds for the Knight campus at the potential risk of funding for other capital priority projects, such in this case, Eustis Hall. So the path that we have worked with President Schill and are choosing to move forward on is to prioritize the investment of Eustis Hall and the deferred maintenance, and leave open the option for the legislature to fund the additional investment in the Knight campus, but signaling that our first priority is the Eustis Hall investment.
Okay, thank you.
Other investments in the governor's budget that impact the U of O, some very good news in her base budget. She prioritized $12 million to fully build out Shake Alert and Alert Wildfire. I think some of the fire seasons that we've had recently in this state helped her prioritize that. So that's very good news, the full $12 million. As Hans said, $5 million was allocated in her strategic fund for the 2021 World Track and Field Championships. There was $15 million in her investment plan budget for campus public safety improvements. And I think you all heard from Andre yesterday. Andre helped lead the governor's campus safety work group, which was formed after the Umpqua Community College shooting in the fall of 2015. And this is a continuation of that. And then finally, there was a $10 million investment in the investment budget in the GRB that would go to Business Oregon for what's called the Public University Innovation Fund. And essentially, this would be a fund that would allow universities, when they are applying for federal research grants or part of a consortium and applying for a research grant, be able to identify a pot of state funding for matching, because some federal grants require or put weight on state matching funds, and currently that doesn't exist. So that would be a new way that the state would invest in public university research, which we're always trying to get them to do more. So we see that as a very positive sign. So that concludes the state affairs slide deck, and we are happy to take questions. No. Slide it to Betsy.
Can I ask?
Yep, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about the tax proposals and timing. I just want, in terms of the decisions we make here, and tuition and all of that. My understanding is if there is a big tax package, most likely people will try to refer that to the ballot to repeal it. So I'm thinking about it as something that probably gets you into late 19 at best before you even know whether that money is there. Am I thinking about that?
I think that the way the timeline that we're looking at is if the legislature passed a revenue package and it was repealed, which, just looking back historically how these things go in the state, that would happen. We'd probably be looking at a special session in late January 2020. So the timeline of the special election is challenging. Right. And we would have to move forward, essentially, with the understanding that it could be repealed. And, the last time this happened was in January 2010 with Measure 66 and 67. And those did pass, but that would be the timeline.
I think one of the things that keeps Libby and I up at night is that the academic calendar and the legislative calendar do not align in any logical way. And the conversation that we will have to have with Jamie and the folks in the legislature, and frankly the technical folks in the Legislative Fiscal Office, is how can any appropriation to universities be structured in a way that accommodates for that conflict of calendars, recognizes the possibility of a referendum or a referral. The nice thing that we have in place today that we did not have in 2010 is if there is a special election in January of 2020, the legislature will be coming in for a February session a month later and can chart a path forward depending on any outcome there. But it will pose challenges for us and all of you.
And that's my greatest concern with all of that. And there are already people organizing to refer the tax package that they haven't seen. So that's sort of the spot that we're in.
Has anyone, I just asked what the annual budget was for HEC. 199 is the answer. Is anyone pushing to maybe that's like 100 that we don't need to spend, or is am I the only one asking, or?
I'm sure you are not the only one asking. I mean, at this point, we don't spend a lot of our time in Salem on the HEC's agency budget. I think we're really focused on our agenda and investment in students and research. So, I mean, it's a good question, and I think that there we try and make sure when the HEC goes through its agency request budget process, which happens in the spring and summer, where it makes requests to the governor and the legislature for strategic investments, whether it's in FTE or new programming. We talk with the provost, we talk with campus leaders and try and provide feedback on that. And say, you know, these are areas where the universities already have expertise or resources that the state could use, so you don't need to reinvent the wheel by hiring new people at the agency. But, you know, it is a big agency with a big mission, and so they do need their FTE, but we do try and be strategic and provide feedback to them and others about what smart investments look like.
I think one thing we have to remember when we look at the HEC budget is when it was created in 2013, the legislature took all of the Oregon Student Access Commission, the state financial aid programs, all administration for community colleges, and all of the licensing for cosmetology, private career schools, and combined that into one entity. So we have to look at the overall budget number, but really the other conversation we have to have is what is the piece of that budget that is designated toward looking at universities and working specifically with us, and how are we working to, as Libby said, eliminate overlap and make sure that they're focused on coordinating and you all are focused on governing.
Okay, any other questions at the state level? Betsy, should we turn to federal?
Sure. Good morning, or maybe good afternoon. Thanks to Libby and Hans for that terrific presentation. We're going to turn our attention to the federal landscape. The last time I was before you was about 45 days after President Trump was inaugurated. Now Congress is weeks away from finishing the 115th Congress. It has not yet enacted a budget, although the federal fiscal year began October 1. It has until Friday to finish the budget or pass another continuing resolution to keep the government operating. It looks like it'll do that, and the next period of uncertainty will be December 21st, that we'll need to see action take place. This slide is a reminder of the early concern about appointments and executive orders, as well as the appropriations action that occurred in 2017-18. The written report that's in your packet covers our appropriations priorities in depth, as well as a number of policy initiatives. For the purpose of this panel, my goal is to focus on coalition advocacy activity in the 115th Congress, how we've worked with our associations, AAU and APLU, to describe what it looks like when I say we're working with our associations. What are we doing in Washington, D.C.? What are we doing in Oregon? And we'll look ahead to the 116th Congress. But regardless of who's president or which party controls which chamber of Congress, the relationship between research universities and the federal government is often framed as a partnership, as Mary Sue Coleman, president of AAU, does here. It's a partnership that began with the Morrell Act. The Morrell Land Grant Act established the national commitment to federal research in 1862, followed by congressional action creating the National Academies of Science in 1863. The national commitment to student aid came about after World War II with the GI Bill, later buttressed by the Higher Education Act of 1965. Post-World War II and the Cold War also saw the creation of federal research agencies that expanded sponsored research even more. As we think about advocacy coalitions among universities, keep in mind that there are about 200 universities that are strong partners with the federal government for the purposes of conducting scientific research across the full portfolio of research agencies. These are the 200 institutions classified as Carnegie Research Universities. But there are about 4,000 institutions that have a stake in student aid. These are our partners in giving students opportunities for degrees, whether they're community colleges, four-year liberal arts colleges, or doctoral institutions. Let's use an example, immigration, to talk about advocacy. No sooner had the presidential election occurred than people began organizing to support Dreamers. President Schill was among the very first wave of presidents to join the President's Alliance for Higher Education and Immigration. It was first formed to support DACA enrollees right after the election. As of this month, there are 25 actions affecting international students and scholars, ranging from administrative changes, regulatory actions, or litigation that our higher education associations are tracking. Over the past 2 years, we have twice used our advocacy tool in the coordinated national effort with other universities to keep Congress focused on DACA. That's the tool Libby talked about in her presentation. We also met with members of our delegation. In this slide, you see Senator Wyden meeting with DACA enrollees. He said it was one of the most moving experiences he's had in his entire congressional career. We also work to keep our delegation apprised of impacts to international students and scholars. Sometimes we even ask for help on a casework basis. For example, when vacancies in the State Department led to problems with our math faculty being able to get an export license to travel to an international conference in Iran, we were able to work with Greg Walden and the rest of the Oregon delegation to take action on behalf of the University of Oregon, as well as other institutions, to break the logjam and get them the export license so they could travel. Just 2 weeks ago, Senators Wyden and Merkley joined with other senators to tell the Department of Homeland Security how important international students are to higher education and how important they are to local economies. The key here is that higher educations need universities to tell our stories and engage our delegations in DC and on campus. Obviously, immigration and DACA are issues that we're going to continue to be paying attention to in this next Congress. The 116th Congress will begin January 3rd. Congressman DeFazio is now Chairman DeFazio, Chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He has used his position on the committee to benefit the university in many ways, including support for the University Transportation Center, which led to the Sustainable Cities Initiative, support for Shake Alert, and support for the Museum of Natural and Cultural History. We will work to make sure that that support continues now that he is chairman. Congresswoman Bonamici keeps her important role on the Science Committee, as well as House Education and Labor. But now she's in the majority, and it gives her different opportunities to have influence. While we work with the higher education associations and coalitions, it's not the higher education associations that members want to hear from. They want to hear from Oregonians. Our job is to deliver a coordinated message that scales up to advance our particular priorities. So let me give you some examples of engagement. In Washington, D.C., we have organized congressional briefings to highlight topics of interest and importance to lawmakers. On the left, Nico Larco is presenting on autonomous vehicles at a session in June hosted by Congressman Blumenauer. He's making the case for university research, he's making the case for a particular kind of investment in university research, and he's making the case for the University of Oregon. This is a session that also included a program officer from NSF. We've also done briefings involving Shake Alert, disaster resilient universities, and an interesting project with the journalism school funded by the National Science Foundation. Those are done in coalition with our associations of higher education. We make a particular priority of connecting the education faculty with the Oregon delegation because funding for the Institute of Education Sciences and OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, is so important to our research portfolio. Here, Randy Camphouse and faculty are presenting at the Library of Congress. Dear colleagues are letters organized by a member of Congress to highlight priorities as a way of advancing appropriations priorities. Congresswoman Bonamici with colleagues from California and Senator Merkley with a colleague from Massachusetts lead the appropriations, dear colleagues, advocating for IES. This means that they are the national leaders in advocating for education research. They do that because it matters to the University of Oregon, and the research that we do matters to children and families. Faculty and our professionals from our different parts of campus also participate in one-on-one meetings and in advocacy days organized by scientific societies or their associations. These are all tools used in coalition advocacy in order to keep the Oregon delegation's support evergreen. But engagement isn't limited to outreach to Congress. Advanced Wood Research or the Tall Wood Institute is one of the funding priorities that the University of Oregon is tracking with Oregon State University. University of Oregon student research was included in a display at the National Building Museum in 2017. And engagement doesn't only result in budget and appropriations action. Sometimes engagement leads to enhanced profile for the university. Earlier this year, Congressman DeFazio asked the Museum of Natural and Cultural History to apply for a National Medal of Science. He thought their outreach activities merited national attention. Once they agreed, he supplied the formal nomination letter, and as you know, they were among the entities selected for the National Medal of Service. And we engage on campus. These are scenes of campus activity. Congressman DeFazio is meeting with SCORE students to hear about efforts to recruit and retain students of color in STEM fields. And graduate students are successfully taking action last year to oppose taxing tuition waivers. We're fortunate in the depth of support that our delegation has for higher education, but we do face challenges ahead. Budget. It's always about the money. The federal environment has been especially complicated since 2011 when the Budget Control Act was passed. That law is in effect until 2022. It requires mandatory across-the-board budget cuts unless certain debt and deficit target reduction targets are met, or unless Congress waives the requirement to meet those targets, which is often what needs to occur before a budget can happen. The Budget Control Act was passed as a result of a jump in budget deficits around 2010. While you may not be able to see the numbers, you can see the jump. We are again approaching trillion-dollar deficit levels in the next fiscal year for a combination of reasons. The trillion-dollar deficits are on top of the current federal debt of around $22 trillion. It will become necessary to again lift the debt ceiling sometime in March. These are forcing events that affect the ability of Congress to pass budgets. Unless the caps on spending are lifted, Congress will be forced to make across-the-board budget cuts to discretionary spending. There are other issues to watch in 2019 and beyond. In addition to budget, the appropriations agenda is going to be determined by how Congress deals with the availability of revenue and spending caps. We're going to keep our focus on our traditional research and student aid priorities, as well as having a special focus on those priorities that make a bigger difference to the University of Oregon, like education research. There's been a talk of a return to earmarks. Earmarks have been banned by caucus rules since 2011. This is an issue to watch. Earmarks are a lot like budget notes. They don't have the force of law. They're a way to direct funds to a particular project. They can be complicated and disrupt competitive funding unless they're done in a thoughtful way. Infrastructure is a hot topic. It's one where Congressman DeFazio and Congressman Blumenauer are going to be ideally situated to have a big impact. There could be opportunities around research investments related to green infrastructure, to resilience, and possibly to deferred maintenance. The Higher Education Act. Congress is again going to consider whether or not to reauthorize the Higher Education Act. This is the vehicle that governs the administration of student aid, and as you know, it's used as a carrot and stick to control our activities. And while we've covered immigration and issues related to DACA and students and international scholars, there are topics related to science and security, which are driven by bipartisan concerns that are occupying a lot of attention on the part of our higher education associations. Before we wrap up this panel and leave the 115th Congress, I do want to highlight a couple of positive things that have happened in this last Congress. First, our champions for research and student aid stood up early. We had support for funding at a level that was either up, as with NIH, or some healthy increases for NSF if they get adopted in this next budget, and we were able to stave off some potential cuts to IES. Second, there have been appointments that we've been pleased with. Jerry Richmond was reappointed to the National Science Board. The proposed head for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Vice President of the University of Oklahoma, is somebody who has been roundly applauded as an excellent choice for the White House Office on Science and Technology Policy. Some of the Education Department appointments our faculty are certainly satisfied with. The head of Institute of Education Sciences and the head of OSEP are certainly appointments that we are not unhappy with. So there have been a number of bright spots, and it speaks to the partnership that I talked about at the very beginning of this presentation. The interest in higher education in this country goes back a long ways, and it's a relationship that we have to tend. It's important to the nation that we have a well-prepared workforce and that we have universities capable of doing the kind of research that makes a difference for our economy. So with that, I'll bring the panel to a close. My goal was to describe different ways we work with our higher education associations to show you what that looks like on campus, what engagement means when we're working with the delegation, and how that scales up in a way that hopefully results in a change of action. If you have questions about sort of where the funding levels on different appropriations bills are hanging out, take a look at my report or let me answer a question or two. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Are there questions for Betsy? Can you just talk a little bit more about the Higher Education Act? I mean, what are the basic good and bad features of it for us?
So one place to start with the Higher Education Act is that Edith Green and Wayne Morse, who were both elected officials from Oregon, really were people who helped create an environment where higher education became a focus with Lyndon Johnson. So they introduced a Higher Education Facilities Act that was a predecessor to the Higher Education Act. And the Facilities Act, while Congress has not invested in higher education buildings in many, many years, led to this effort to create aid and other ways to encourage people to be able to have more access to college. So the most important thing is it authorizes all of the financial aid programs, lending, student aid, grants, Pell. It is the vehicle that funds student aid. It also, in order to be able to administer financial aid, it has provisions we have to comply with. Title IX, Clery Act, other provisions around campus safety. There are also pieces related to teacher preparation programs, and we worry sometimes that there could be new requirements placed on colleges of education around their success in delivering outcomes around students that might discourage people from working in more challenging schools. So I'm not sure I'm fully answering the question.
Are there other questions for any of the three? Hans and Libby, thank you. You've got lots of challenges, and it sounds like we're very well represented. So hang in there. It's terrific. I won't ask about HEC's budget again. I won't ask you about HEC's budget again.
Are you willing to make that promise?
No. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Good luck. Thank you.
So we're going to break for lunch now, Angela. Is that our plan? And then reconvene at 1 o'clock or quarter till?
45, 1 o'clock. You name the time.
Let's say we reconvene at 1.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Let's call the meeting to order. We have a really entertaining session next with featuring our CFO and beginning the tuition setting knowledge prep for the board.
It's Kevin.
So,
And Kevin Marbury.
oh, where is he? Oh, okay, and Kevin's joining us. Okay. So, tuition setting prep discussion 1.
Terrific. Well, I'm going to start us off, and Kevin is the co-chair. The two of us are co-chairing the tuition and fee advisory board this year. With Brad retiring, I've taken on a new partner in this, so you'll be seeing the two of us quite a bit. And
Should we say congratulations,
yeah,
Kevin?
I'm sure. He's very happy.
I'm extraordinarily happy, although I'm wondering why Brad is walking around with this huge smile on his face these days. I'm hoping it's about the retirement and not being part of TFAB.
Yeah. So there are two things we wanted to do today. The first one I'm going to run through is to just walk you through the updated cost drivers that we're looking at for next year. No real surprises here, but I do want to talk through the numbers. And then we're going to talk through the process that we've been using with the Tuition and Fee Advisory Board so you have a sense of the activities that we've been engaged in and what we have planned for the calendar going forward. So what I'm going to start with is a slide that hopefully looks really familiar. I'm guessing if I turn to one of you, you might even be able to explain it to everybody, because I know I've talked about cost drivers so often with this group. But did want to just highlight and remind folks that every year as we go through the tuition process, one of the critical questions that we look at on TFAB is what costs are going up at the university next year. Because if costs are going up, then we need to either figure out ways that we're going to end up reducing other costs, or that we are going to generate revenue to cover those costs. And typically, just to remind folks, we do look at these, what we call major cost drivers. This absolutely does not capture every single cost at the university that's going up. We may have units that are making investments or hiring staff. We're just trying to look at those major drivers that we know each year increase year over year.
And Jamie, this is 25 on a base of?
540 million, I believe, off the top of my head. And I'll show you some slides with those numbers, so we'll see how close I got to pulling that number out of the air. What we've put on this first slide, we just have 3 slides for you today. What we've put on this first slide is a little bit of history so that you can have a sense of how our major cost drivers compare for the coming year, again, fiscal year 20 is next year, to what we've experienced the last 2 years. In general, we're looking at the same types of issues, although there have been a couple changes I'm going to talk about at the very bottom. So if you start at the top with faculty, staff, and GE, which is our GTF salary and wages, what you'll see is we've been pretty consistent here, which is actually interesting because our salary base has been growing. So normally you would expect to see these costs grow slightly. The reason why we've been stable is that these costs, which are primarily linked to our major labor contracts with our labor unions, we have been successful in getting some of those annual increases to be a little bit lower. And in particular, the reason why we're only at about 10.6 million is because of some of the terms that were negotiated in the last faculty contract, which typically affects both faculty and our unrepresented staff. But we are looking at costs for those salary increases that are around 10.6 million. This year, for example, in January, we're implementing a 2% salary increase process for faculty and unrepresented staff. Yeah.
Jamie, what assumptions are here on enrollment growth and you know, the night campus? There's a lot of things going on in terms of building for the future.
Yeah,
that's all in here?
These costs are not, these are assuming stable enrollment growth. So as we model out growth, we have also modeled out the costs that we need to support that growth. So that was all in the numbers that we discussed in September when we looked at the long-range modeling. Most of the costs associated with growth will not come into play for many years because right now we're at a student population that's actually lower than where we've been in the past, so we do have some room for excess capacity. The night campus is a different measure because that's not, I should remind folks, this is just education in general. So it's that left-hand side of the budget page that I share. The night campus would be a great example of an operation that's fully funded off of gift funds. So they're going to have these same types of cost drivers for that operation, but they're going to have to fund it off of gift funds. And that's one thing, actually, it's a great reminder that I should tell folks, which is the numbers that you're seeing up here represent these cost drivers on the education and general fund. We have these exact same dynamics in other parts of the university, like housing, athletics, grants. It's just that we don't cover those increases with tuition dollars. It's expected that those units cover all of the same types of cost drivers with either their revenue, their fee revenue, their grants, et cetera. Okay? So again, fairly stable. That is every year our largest element of our cost drivers is typically associated with those increases, and that's because labor is over, it's roughly speaking about 80% of our budget is tied up in people. On the medical cost side, just to remind folks, we're mandated by the state to participate in the state's health insurance program. We do not have a choice of this. That program each year, basically in December, tells us how much the costs are going up. We're anticipating something, this number represents, I believe it's 3.7% increases. That's actually pretty reasonable compared to where we've been in the past. If you went back 5-7 years ago, we were seeing increases that were closer to 6 or 7%, so at least that has come down somewhat. I almost want to skip retirement because we've talked about it so much, but just to remind folks, again, we're part of we are mandated by state law to offer to our employees the ability to participate in PERS, which is the state's retirement program. We do not control the assessments in that program, meaning that there is a state board that each biennium tells us how much the rates are going to be. Because of the current situation where we are underfunded, the program is underfunded, they are increasing the rates every 2 years. So we are looking at about $7.6 million for the retirement costs going up in the E&G fund. If you look at the entire institution, it's actually over $10 million. But again, that other part of it will be absorbed by those budgets outside of E&G. And the one piece of good news I can tell you is that PERS typically gives us what they call advisory rates, which are before they finalize their rates. And the advisory rates, actually, when we initially got them, would have been closer to $9 million. But fortunately, the market moved up last year. And then when they've issued the final PERS report on which the rates were based, the unfunded portion of liability had just barely gotten small enough to be above the collar rate, for those of you who follow PERS. So what that means is that there was a limit in how much they could increase our rates in a given biennium. So we will see our rates go up $7.6 million. They will then stay flat the next year, and then they're going up again. Just to let you know, the next biennium, we're set to go up. Institutional expenses, what that represents are increases we're estimating in things like our utilities bill for campus, insurance that we're paying, debt on academic buildings that we're using central resources for. We do have some assessments that we have to pay, those types of things. And generally speaking, it's around $1 million a year. Last year it was less because we had some savings in our power station, and we were able to have that number be a little bit lower. Strategic investments, we mentioned this yesterday when the IT presentation came forward, and I mentioned that that would go through our strategic investment process. We do typically set aside $2 million for strategic investments. And that goes through a budget advisory group process where a committee of about 20 people, students, faculty, and staff, generally make recommendations to the provost and president on the most pressing investments that we do need to make. I'll point out some of that money is actually pre-committed this year. For example, when we reduced the tuition, differential tuition in the Honors College, we were counting on funds from last year and this year to support that. But we will be going through a process starting later in the year on these funds. And then a couple changes for you, so a couple things you haven't seen. One is that for a number of years we have been investing incremental funds in our tenure track faculty. We are now at the end of that process of what we had planned. So this fiscal year, the current fiscal year, is our final year of adding more resources to that. And we'll be more in a steady state kind of basis going forward, which means we don't actually have incremental costs. We'll constantly be hiring because we have turnover with folks, people retiring, and that gives the provost office an opportunity, working with faculty and the deans, to really strategically decide where we're investing in more faculty. But we are not putting incremental dollars that we need to cover going forward in that bucket. But there is another thing that's kind of popped on the radar, which we knew was coming, but has not been a sizable impact to this point, which is a number of years ago, the legislature approved a minimum wage increase plan for Oregon that was stepped in over, I think it was 5 or 6 years, where each year minimum wage went up by a certain amount. And the past couple of years, it hasn't really affected us because most of our jobs were above those thresholds, but we're now hitting the point looking forward for next year where that minimum wage will start to impact us, mainly with student positions, and I think there may be a few classified positions. But this is an estimate that was done by our budget office of taking current positions and assuming that if you have to move them to that minimum wage, what would that cost just to keep the same people, again, mainly students in this case, employed. So overall, you'll see it's about a $24 million increase, what we're expecting, which again is very similar to what we experienced 2 years ago. I'm not really going to run through this in huge detail, but it gives you have this in your packet, it gives you a little bit more of the detail behind some of these numbers, how many faculty and staff are involved, the minimum wage going to $11.25, those types of things, so that you do have it. And then finally, it's always interesting to look at this on a percentage basis, and I see I was $1 million off on my estimate to earlier about our total, so our E&G fund is $541 million. But it's always interesting to look at it on a percentage basis. Last year, off the top of my head, when we were not in a PERS increase year, my memory was our overall increase was just over 3% to the fund. This year, mainly because of that PERS increase,
we're looking at a total percentage increase that is about 4.45% in terms of the total budget of the entire E&G fund. If you look at the percentages, you can see most of the items are really not that large, except on a percentage basis that retirement cost increase, which what we're looking at right now is about 14%. When we look at all of our categories of retirees. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what we're facing, not to make this more daunting, but I'm going to just make it more daunting. Most years we've run this analysis, we're working off of a year where we have a balanced budget. We are not in a balanced budget this year, and so we will need to recoup at some point. If basically we continue along with the deficit we talked about in the Finance Committee meeting, where we have about a $5.6 million gap today between revenue and expense, that's something else that we're going to need to be thinking about in terms of how we balance the budget going forward. Any questions on that before we turn to more of the process? Again, I hope it's pretty familiar. It's the type of analysis we've been trying to be pretty consistent with how we do this each year.
Any questions at this point? Okay, Jamie.
So Kevin's going to chat. I'll probably chime in occasionally, but talk a little bit about the process that we've been using with TFAB.
So I'm going to take a few minutes at a time to talk a little bit about the process and highlight maybe 4 points that are embedded within the materials that you have. The first point is a little bit of a snapshot of who we are and what we are, a little bit about progress to date, what's upcoming for the group, and then a little bit highlight some of the changes or the enhancements that we think are going to assist us with this very challenging process this year. So as you all know, appointments are made to TFAB in the fall, and this year the President made 17 appointments that include students, faculty, staff, and administrators. As always, our task is to provide him with a recommendation on where we should set tuition and fees for the upcoming year. He did make one change this year that you should be aware of, and that is that the tuition schedule is going to be delayed a little bit as because of the significant financial challenges facing the university. So he's asked that we provide him a recommendation about resident undergraduate tuition rates in early May, when we have a little bit more information as it relates to enrollment and what the state will likely be giving to us. So thus far this year, we've had 4 meetings, and they were primarily set to review a ton of information. I think you have copies of the range and scope of the information that we have been discussing thus far. But it's important to note that we're not a voting group. We're an advisory group, and so much of what we're doing is trying to reach consensus through discussion and dialogue. Ultimately, though, when we land on a recommendation that we'll give to the President, we will include in the documentation any dissenting opinions so that he has full context on how we arrived at those kind of conversations. And I should note, on a personal note, I've been really encouraged by the level of commitment by this group thus far this term. We've averaged about 14 members per meeting, and at least 4 students of the 5 student members have been at every meeting. Actually, we've ended up with additional students because student guests have been in, and so we've had 1 or 2 guests as well as a reporter from the Daily Emerald. But the conversations, the level of commitment, the consistency by which these students are showing up to these meetings and engaging in the conversation has really been impressive, and I think that that's going to go a long way towards us getting to a good place where people feel like they've had a voice and have been involved in the process. Beginning next quarter, it really ramps up for us. In the month of January, we'll have at least 5 meetings on a weekly basis. We'll start hearing from some of the groups as it relates to the fee proposals. We'll start talking about graduate tuition rates. We'll start talking about the undergraduate tuition rates. But probably the most important thing we may do during that month is the first of several student forums. And we have, this year, attempted to do more with participation levels at those forums. Now, we recognize that the ASUO has been very committed and good partners in helping us to bring people to that table, but we want to make sure that students that are not necessarily using ASUO as their primary contact are also invited to the process. And so we have created a list that we will directly link out to student leaders of our affinity groups, of FSL, from some of our student advisory boards on campus, to try to encourage them to participate and be involved in the process going forward. We'll use our February meetings to gather all of this information and make our preliminary recommendation to the president, at which point he will consider all the information that he's gotten. We'll set up a forum for his recommendations to be shared with students as well, and sometime in late February. And from that information, you should have enough information at your March meeting to make a decision on non-resident undergraduate and graduate tuition. We'll reconvene once we have more information around enrollment numbers and what the state might likely give us. And then at that point, we will try to set the undergraduate resident rate. And we'll set up another student forum with the president so that, again, we can have some input and some conversation around that decision, which then will lead to you being given some the materials you need to make a decision on the that rate in May. And then I would say, to close out my comments, there are a couple of enhancements I think that are really important and will play a huge role in students feeling better about, well, not just students, the university community feeling better about the process. And one of the things that I think that I've heard over the years is this issue of transparency, that these conversations and these discussions and decisions are made behind closed doors. And I think we've done a couple of things that will enhance our ability to get information out. One, our meetings are scheduled around the schedules of students. So we make sure that their schedules will allow them to attend. And so far, been very, very good in terms of consistency of their attendance at those meetings. The meeting format's 90 minutes. And we've done a really nice job, I should say Jamie's done a really nice job of slotting the information into those 90-minute sessions so that we could really delve into understanding the complex issues, metrics, and things that we need to make a good decision. The website has been updated and is probably the most current website on campus in terms of the information that we have used in each of those meetings, and also a summary of what's happened at the meetings, as well as the upcoming schedule for the year being posted on that website. So finally, I think ultimately what we're trying to do is make sure that we are as transparent and inclusive in this process as possible. And I think a big shout out would have to go to Debbie Sharp, who works in Jamie's office in terms of being the support for a lot of this work. This is significant work. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and there's going to be some significant challenges with this far, but this year. But I do believe that we have the process in place, and I think we have the people in place to at least make a really solid recommendation to the president and ultimately to you when we set those rates later on this year.
Yep. So I wanted to add just a couple things about the spring schedule before we open it up if there are any questions. One is it does look a little different than what you've seen, and we did this year after really thinking about what happened 2 years ago when we had to set resident tuition at a point where we had very little information, and we ended up setting a very high rate to begin with, hoping to buy it down. That wasn't particularly helpful because what ended up happening was the high rate was kind of communicated broadly out, and then when the board voted to bring the rate down, that information didn't necessarily get out as broadly, and so it was left, I think, in many people's mind that we just had this 10.6% tuition increase. So we're hoping to avoid that this year, and the thinking was by moving to the May time period, we'll have a better sense of what's happening in the legislative process. We also will have more information about deposits and what's happening with the incoming class. There is another twist that I want to just add to this all that the president may want to jump in or others on, which is this year, normally when the governor sets her budget, we're used to seeing one budget and one number, and then we work off of that number as the basis for our process. This year, as you heard earlier from Hans and Libby, we actually have two numbers, and those numbers are very, very different. So under the budget that does not include any new revenue, the number that we've been given is a flat funding of the PUSF, which basically is year over year. About the best estimate I have from the most recent HEC model, when I plug that in, is our funding would drop $2.7 million. So we'd be looking at a year with these kinds of cost increase and literally our state funding dropping. With the $120 million budget, our budget would go up $8 million. So there's a $10.7 million difference, which is very significant in those two scenarios. The governor has asked all of the institutions to move forward and to set tuition assuming that the investment budget is put forward. That obviously puts us in a challenging position if the investment budget were not actually put forward. And so right now there have been some conversations around trying to work out what would that look like in the details if we were to move forward. Could we, for example, get more flexibility with the HEC in case things did not actually work out and we had to go back and then end up with a higher tuition because that funding level doesn't come through? Could we get clear communication? Because when Kevin and I go to TFAB, which is going to meet in January, if that's the direction that we're headed, it would be helpful to have some clear communication from the governor around this directive so that it's clear, because normally I would not advise normally in a situation that if you're looking at a scenario that you necessarily assume the high end of the scenario is going to happen. But we are, and maybe the president or others want to speak more to this, we are in a situation where she has asked the institutions to do that, and we're trying to work through the details of what would that look like in practice, and what assurances could we get if that investment budget doesn't come through, that we're able to quickly make a change in terms of the tuition that we do have to charge to make things actually balance in terms of the budget. So this is very new information. I apologize if that just came out a little rambly, and Mike may have more words to say, but it does add another layer of complexity. I think my key message to you all is that both the Tuition and Fee Advisory Board as well as our board are going to be dealing with both a lot of uncertainty and complexity in the coming months, because we do need to set tuition in May so that as we roll new students onto campus, they have certainty around what their packages are going to look like, both from a tuition perspective and a financial aid perspective. We're trying to push it back as much as we can to have as much information as possible when we're forced to make that decision. But the reality is it's going to be one of those years where there's a lot of different balls in the air. And I think Mike might give a few words you want to say.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple comments. One, we didn't expect to be in this situation with two different alternative budgets that were going to be very different. And just as background, and this is not Jamie's presentation, but even if the best result comes about, which is the investment budget of $120 million and a tuition increase under 5%, because those two things go together in the governor's mind. So that would be, let's say, if it was 4.9%, we would still have a challenging budget for next year, largely because we begin the year in deficit carried over from this year. So it's not going to be, so it's not like it feels good. It's doing better if we get the investment budget, but it's not going to solve all of our budgetary problems. And ultimately, enrollment growth, as we've talked about, is the answer. But we don't know where that's going to come in. And so actually, I think if it comes in at where we were planning enrollment, we still will have a challenging budget situation next year. So it's going to be difficult, and you'll see that work its way through, and we can be more specific about that if you'd like. I don't know whether Jamie has the numbers with her, but we can certainly follow up. But going back to the governor's request, I believe next month we're going to have another meeting and we're going to have a conversation. And I can only commit to what I'm going to recommend to you. It's ultimately your decision whether you're willing to set tuition under 5% based upon the hope that we get the $120 million investment budget through the legislature and then through a potential referendum after that. And that's something that you'll have to make a decision as fiduciaries of the institution. And I expressed my own willingness to consider recommending that to you, but if you all feel strongly the other way, it's useful for me to have the information at an earlier stage so I don't go out on a ledge and say, yeah, I'm going to recommend it, which will lead people to believe that we're going to do something like that. I'm not sure whether that's a conversation in the board or whether it's just
Do you have more on that subject?
No.
Jamie, how sure are we that the 120 allocation would result in us getting 20? or whatever number you want to pick.
What I can tell you, I'd say we're going to be in the ballpark. It's 8 million is what happened was the HEC distributed an updated version of their model. What their model does is it looks at a couple years of history of enrollment patterns, graduation patterns, and then it predicts kind of where each school is going to land and divvies out the dollars based on that algorithm. We did, I think I mentioned to you, or I did mention to you in the Finance Committee, we had $1 million ante up because our numbers dropped slightly from their projections, not our projections, and then other schools went up. And so there can be slight changes in the model. But I think it's a fairly reasonable estimate that $8 million, it could also go up because we had, over time, because we had more freshmen who were residents that came in this year. So it's hard to predict because it's dependent not just on our behavior, but on the other 6 campuses, since you're taking a fixed pie and divvying it up.
So it's important that we all recall this is a 2-year, the 120s over 2 years, there's a structural distortion that the first year is less than the second year, and that the 20 that we've sort of modeled we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
So that's one observation. A second observation is, I think we as a board and as a university, and we've had this conversation before, need to assume responsibility wherever possible for managing our costs. The other part of that is, as we discuss what tuition is required to meet those costs, we should be clear about which costs we are unable to manage, PERS. So we want to just be fully transparent on those as you come back and talk to us about it. Okay, you had a question, Jeanette?
Two quick things. One is TFAB going to give us a with and a without a proposal, the bare bones versus the investment?
That is my assumption of what we're going to have to move forward. And Kevin mentioned this. I mean, we're going to come forward in March with non-resident tuition and with all the fees and the graduate programs. And then we are still meeting March, April, May, and we're going to have to be in discussions with that group about kind of the, if we get the 120, what's the number, and then what's the recommendation if we end up not getting it.
So we're going to be in a position, though, of needing to agree on a tuition increase with the same lack of knowledge. So if we say, it's easy if we get the 120. If we don't, then what's the process in May where we have to go back and say, okay, we can't do it at 5%, then what are we going to do? What's the heck?
Yeah, let me be a little bit clearer.
Sorry,
I think in May,
what's the heck schedule? How do we get?
Yeah, so I think assuming we follow the governor's requested process in May, what we'd be bringing forward for a formal recommendation from the president would be we're putting forward a proposal to increase tuition, assuming the 120. The question then is we would know, I believe, at least through the legislature, what happens with the investment and how much gets invested in the PUSF by the beginning of July, right? Because session would be done. And so if it turns out that we are not given the 120, then we would have to go back to the board in July to come back to you for a reconsideration of what to do, given that we just lost $10.7 million recurring. So at that point, we would be coming back. And then part of the thing that we're still trying to work out with the governor is we would want to be in a position to very quickly get HEC approval of whatever we need to do, because the reason we're in that position is because we went with the assumption of the 120 in May. So that's where some of these questions around timing and criteria, et cetera, get into play. There is another risk, though, just to put on the table, that it's passed and that the budget is passed, but then it goes to a referendum and then it gets voted down, in which case then the following year we'd be dealing with the repercussions of that in terms of our budget and then whether there's a tuition action we would need to take. So there's multiple, I think, points of uncertainty, but I at least my understanding of kind of the path that's being asked of us, it would be in May coming to the board for a tuition decision that assumes the 120, knowing that if that doesn't come through in the legislative session, that we're probably having a special board meeting as soon as we know that, and then asking for an expedited HEC process so our students aren't left in the lurch not knowing what's going on over the summer.
I think as much information as we can do in that May meeting will help both with our uncertainty, but also from the perspective of the families out there that are trying to commit for fall. Now, it's not just our problem. All the schools are going to have the same problem. So there's a tuition uncertainty in the state, right?
Yes,
absolutely. So the plan, just to clarify, so the plan in May, I don't know if it's going to be 2 or more or what. I mean, that's up to kind of TFAB. But the plan is to bring to you both the scenario under the 120 investment, but also an alternative or the alternative scenarios so that you can have a full discussion about that in May. Because the other thing that, we've heard from you guys clearly is having a tuition conversation when the school year is over is really unfortunate. The students aren't here. People aren't here, and so having as much of that dialogue in TFAB as possible, allowing the TFAB to engage with the president in the public forum processes, kind of on these what-if scenarios, having that full discussion with you all in May, and then just having to wait and see. So that would be that'll be the plan.
And those TFAB meetings, I think having them well publicized, and to us, especially those of us that live in town, can get there would be really helpful.
Yeah, we'll make sure you have that.
Any concerns that we're going to be setting tuition after the signing day of May 1? And what's because we could get a false read on enrollment after May because the tuition goes up after that.
Yeah, so I've talked to Roger about this, and we are trying as best as possible to get things settled before students start coming for their orientation sessions in the summer. The reason we're looking after May 1 is because the enrollment, knowing what's going on with enrollment is going to have a huge impact on our budget, and primarily knowing what's happening with non-resident enrollment is going to have a huge impact on our budget. Those tuition rates would be set. But without that information, we're operating in quite a bit in the dark. And so that was the logic behind trying to get past that date, even though it does create a little bit of uncertainty for resident students. But we would just have more information and hopefully be in a position where we're not putting out a high increase and then pulling it back and people don't realize that we've pulled it back.
Okay, any other questions or comments or? Okay, thank you. We look forward to the next meeting. Okay, next we're going to have a session, as we do each time we have an academic area in focus. This time it is health of the built environment.
Oh, we have props. Stand in my Mellenberg. I've been practicing.
Is it Viba? Mellenberg, or is it?
Van den.
That's a good question.
You're Dutch, though, right?
Van den Wijmelenberg,
yeah,
if you prefer, or Van den Wijmelenberg, the more American version.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you Dutch?
I am Dutch. But
well, welcome.
My family's been in the United States. I think I'm 5th generation, so I'm from Wisconsin.
Do you want those behind you like that, or do you want them on the side of the table?
Actually, if it's okay to bring them up here, it'd be great.
Yeah. And Kevin is a professor of architecture, as all of you know from your notes. And Kevin, if you want to introduce colleagues, that'd be terrific.
Yes, wonderful. So today I have a few folks that have joined me. This is Carolina and Denise, who are pursuing degrees in architecture. The studio that Carolina just finished this quarter, this is one of the projects from that studio, and I'll talk about that at the end. And then Denise is funded on a grant with the Tallwood Design Institute, and she's working on making wood buildings also be net zero energy buildings. So that's Denise and Carolina, thank you. And then Charlie is a colleague and professor in architecture, and I was hired a few years ago to help take his lab forward, so GZ Charlie Brown. And then Mark Fretz I'll introduce through the flow.
Wonderful. Thank you, and welcome again.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here. I do have a few notes that I'll I'll read from here on the slide, so I'll stay at the table here with you all and resist my urge to walk around and wave my arms. My name's Kevin, and I've been at University of Oregon this is my fourth year here, and absolutely loving it. So glad to be here. We just launched what's called the Institute for Health in the Built Environment within the last, 9 months or so. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today. Feel free to, as I know you will, interrupt me with questions and get your voice in, and look forward to the dialogue. I have about 15 to 20 minutes of prepared remarks, and then we can go from there. All right? Great. So, architecture. Great architecture holds the power to inspire the soul. It provides shelter, comfort, safety. It can support human productivity. It can promote health and supply more energy than it consumes. If done well, it can leave the water and the air cleaner than when it blew through the door and landed on the roof. It can connect us with the outdoors while sheltering us from its extremes. And I'll say there are some places that some buildings, when you walk into them, they just feel as they were designed just for you. Yet, yes, we consume them with our eyes, but also with our ears and with our skin and our whole person, our lungs, our pineal gland, whatever that is. About a year ago, we launched the Institute for Health in the Built Environment. And this is a new institute here at Oregon that's built upon almost 40 years of history and tradition. Success in architecture, U of O is distinct in sustainability. We were often ranked number one in sustainability. And the Energy Studies and Buildings Lab that Charlie Brown built is a cornerstone of that, some might say. So I'm really excited to take and carry that forward. And then for about the last decade, many of you, I think, have met Dr. Jessica Green over the years. And we've been leading in this area called biology in the built environment. And then in our College of Design, we have a lighting lab that's been around for 20 years, and it's been primarily a teaching lab. But we've just recruited a new faculty member from Lausanne at EPFL in Switzerland, and it's sort of pivoting in becoming more of a research and teaching enterprise. And so those three labs all were looking for a little bit of a rebirth, and the Institute for Health in the Built Environment is the way they all came together to work together in a new way. On top of that, as you can see, we've recruited partners at other institutions as well as in other departments in our own institution, ranging from at Harvard, the School of Public Health, Northwestern's Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. We're working on a project I'll talk about briefly today with OHSU and their Department of General Surgery, Oregon State University Toxicology, as well as their Wood Science and Engineering programs, behavioral science at Oregon Research Institute, and chemistry at both Arizona State and Portland State. And finally, in addition to our own data science expertise, we've got some partnerships with Santa Fe Institute. So the Institute of Health in the Built Environment, is housed in the College of Design with 3 labs here at U of O at its core, but it's already in only a year has extended quite a range of tentacles through shared grant proposals and funded grant opportunities. So this is a little bit more about who we are. I've already introduced Charlie and Jessica Green. Siobhan Rockcastle is the new hire in running the Baker Lighting Lab. And then we have a large team of non-tenure track faculty members that work in one of those 3 labs, many of them in biology in the built environment and energy studies and buildings lab. And then, of course, a large team of students as well. Here are some of our partners at other institutions. Dr. Bob Martindale and Dr. Laszlo Kirle are both in general surgery at OHSU, and we're working on a project with them that was funded with the President's Initiative at the 2 universities, focused on healthcare-associated infection. And then some of the names for the universities, well, these are the faces behind those other university names. And then even more names, right? Lots of students and a lot of people to thank. So all told at U of O, we represent about 45 people, and the Institute as a whole, counting our PIs at other institutions, is about 55 or 60. One of the really exciting components is partly why I came to Oregon, is this history of success, and I think this chance in the built environment area, and I think the chance to continue and build upon that success focused on healthy buildings. It's a nice segue from sustainable design to make that next step to healthy building design. And we knew that we needed a strong industry engagement platform to do that. So as part of the Institute for Health and the Built Environment, we were fortunate to be able, with some presidential support, to be able to recruit Mark Fretz. And he's helped to build our industry engagement platform, or we just call it an industry consortium. Industry partners here, these are the cohort from the first year, so it was wildly successful in its first year. In fact, we almost hit our year 2 growth milestones coming out the gate, so that was really exciting. Good job, Mark. And some really nice partnerships here. So each of these organizations, if they're an architecture or an engineering firm, they buy in at a much lower level, at $5,000 to $10,000 per year. And then if they're a large industry, it's $35,000 to $50,000 per year. And if they meet a small business designation on their tax returns, they have the small industry price of $15,000 to $25,000 per year. So this is a way to sort of build a stable base in terms of diversifying our funding support. But it's also, and more importantly, about hearing from industry about the problems they're facing related to health in the built environment, and also having an avenue for translational sort of research, right? So accelerating impact, to pick up on our night campus phrase. This industry engagement is critical to get our ideas off of white papers and into the field. So when we launched the Institute, we wanted to have the research strength and the industry strength, and then diversify. So you need to have a focus, or you can't do everything, or you do nothing, right? You need to have a focus. So it's health in buildings. But in order to accomplish that, we think it's really important to have a broad range of voices. So we call it radical interdisciplinarity, and I'll unpack that just a little bit. From a sort of foundational standpoint, we know that in architecture, we've learned a lot about evidence-based design. So science to guide the design process, specifically in the healthcare construction industry. That's been a theme for a few decades now, and we think that's really important. And it's sort of resonates with the Institute goals. But equally important is design-driven scientific inquiry. So flipping that around and letting the challenges of design also shape our scientific questions. And then, of course, as researchers, we want our research to integrate into practice. But I think we often think of that too much in a one-way street. And we need to really remember that the problems of practice should also guide our research. And I think both are important.
Amen.
So I'm going to describe 4 wicked problems that are facing the built environment. Number 1, we'll call it the indoor generation. This is a skylight company called Velux who's developed this advertising campaign for their purposes to sell more glass. What it shows is that humans spend 90% of our lives indoors. So we are an indoor creature. And from an exposure standpoint, indoor air can be 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. And that's a sort of surprising fact sometimes, especially in smoke fire summers here in Oregon, right? And so there are other times where that's not true, where we do need to filter and the indoor air is healthier. But a lot of the time, the majority of the time, our indoor air is filled with particulate matter that we wish we could be outside. And I could do an exercise if we had more time where you all closed your eyes and thought of, well, we could do it quickly, of where you're going to go on vacation over the holiday. Now, imagine whether it's a summer locale, a warm weather locale, or a cold weather locale. Think to yourself, what are you doing right now when you're on vacation? Okay, now open your eyes and raise your hand if you are inside. All right, raise your hand if you were outside. There, amen. There we go. Okay. So we all want to be outside more. We need to figure out a way for our architecture to help us feel like we're outside more. We just finished an EPA grant that was all about tightening up our homes. So it was a weatherization program. Anyone heard of Low-Income Weatherization Assistance, LIWAP for short? That's a catchy acronym. And it's all about energy goals, energy-driven agenda to tighten up our envelopes. And our question, of course, was what is that doing for our health? And so the EPA funded this project, and what I was really excited to find is that there are some opportunities where energy and health goals align. And in one case, in our low-income cohort, we saw a reduced incidence of self-reported asthma attacks after the weatherization. And the logic there is because with weatherization, you have less temperature extremes across your envelope, but you also add ventilation on purpose, and as opposed to just the ventilation coming through the cracks under your doors or through your windows. So increased outdoor air exchange rate, reduced self-reported asthma. We've been doing a design-driven guidance around creating healthier and more productive indoor environments. This is a partnership with SRG. Charlie at the lab worked on this building before my time, and it's all about making the indoors more connected to the outdoors with access to fresh air and access to light. This is a place I'd be proud to go and recruit staff to and recruit students to. So we've been tackling this problem from design, but more and more in the last few years, we've been also bringing the evidence to the process, the sort of heavy scientific sledgehammer, in this case, DNA sequencing. This is a partnership with our group in biology, and I'm not going to explain this in great detail, but we built little shoeboxes, little pieces of architecture, if you will. We put household dust into them. We exposed that dust through different types of glazing systems, keeping everything else constant, to different light exposures. And what we found was that light exposure implicates indoor microbial communities, and the light exposure shifts the structure of the bacteria that live in our buildings. And of course, we know that we walk past and that dust gets resuspended and then we inhale it, right? So daylight is an indoor air quality metric, not just a visual comfort or a visual health metric. The little keynotes there on the violin plot, the skin at the bottom shows that the dark communities were more had bacteria more associated with humans, in particular with human skin, and the microbial communities that had more daylight exposure looked more like the outdoors. Wicked problem number 2. Buildings consume 50% of the energy in the U.S. grid. Now, energy is about GDP, right? Buildings are about creating comfort to create GDP. So that works, right? But if we could put our energy to greater effect while also still maintaining comfortable buildings and overall reduce how much fossil fuel-based energy we produce, we can increase GDP. We can spend energy on a more productive purpose, and we can improve outdoor air quality. So again, energy and health are logical connections. So the 2 decades before in the industry, before I came to the lab, I spent most of my time doing research funded by electric utilities, paying me to help people buy less of their product. That's pretty ironic, right? But that's what was funding the innovation in the built environment for the last 2 decades. That is changing quickly. Energy-funded buildings research is changing quickly because of what we call the death spiral. And utilities are starting to recognize, whoa, with energy efficiency and building codes getting more strict, and prices of electric photovoltaic panels and wind energy coming down, there's pressure on their market like there's never been before. And the innovation is not going to continue to be funded by the energy industry. We have to look for other lever arms. I think we've learned some things. We've touched 50 million square feet, 600 buildings. We've saved 45 average megawatts. That's a lot. That's great. However, we need to continue to innovate. I think some of the lessons that we learned about how to drive market transformation with funding from the energy efficiency community can be leveraged into how to drive market transformation for healthy buildings. So we're working on the problem while we're also trying to find the funding mechanisms to fund that process. Another related goal here is reducing overall embodied energy, and wood is a big part of that process. So the Tallwood Design Institute is a partnership between U of O and OSU. Our lab has supported many grants and projects within Tallwood. We collaborated a year ago to write a proposal to the Business Oregon high impact opportunity call, and we're fortunate to win a $700,000 grant to build the world's best acoustics test facility. Why are we studying acoustics when I want to work on health and energy? Well, we want to get mass timber into the built environment, and one of the barriers right now is acoustics. And so, like our work previously in energy, we built new tools to solve, and break down barriers. And this is a new tool that U of O will have within 18 to 24 months. It'll be the world-class acoustics test facility, the only one of its caliber at any university in North America. Wicked problem number 3, 1 in 25, and I'd say truthfully, probably more like 1 in 15 people who go to a hospital get sick because they went to the hospital. Not for the reason they went to the hospital. They got sick again because they went to the hospital. It's called healthcare-associated infection. Oftentimes, people's immune system is suppressed when they go to a hospital, and therefore they are sort of like the canary in the coal mine, if you will, and buildings are reservoirs for bacterial exchange. And the hospital environment is a great place to study this, and hopefully solve it for more than just healthcare settings. But if we can make an impact in healthcare settings, that would in and of itself be important. But I would say more broadly it's applicable because how many folks have had a child get norovirus through, or have a grandchild get norovirus through one of the classroom exchanges? In our school, my children go to O'Hara, and for the last 2 years, we've lost almost a week of school each year. And that has an impact on GDP as well. So what we can learn about dispersal of bacteria and viruses in healthcare settings where we have unmatched data about human health indicators and and dispersal vectors, we can apply to every building type. But even if we could just solve C. diff or start to reduce C. diff in healthcare settings, it can make a big impact. So this is the Kohler Pavilion, and I'll play it again. What you're seeing is a little transformation over a 24-month period that counts every time a patient in that hospital got C. diff. What we did is took their data, which they track, but they don't track it spatially. And we first mapped it to a zonal level. Mark was really involved in this. And then the next step right now, this was for the grant proposal, thankfully funded by the 2 presidents. Now we're starting to break that down into room level and in even more detail to places like MRI machines that maybe don't get cleaned quite as frequently as they ought to. And also looking at the cleaning regimens of rooms that just had a patient with C. diff. There's an increase in incidence of getting C. diff. Sorry, that's Clostridium difficile. It's a gut infection. You don't want it. You stay at the hospital a week to 10 days longer. The 8% of people who get it die. Every case at OHSU costs them $28,000. Increased infection prevention measures, which means increased air exchange rates, which means increased energy consumption. Patient quality of care goes down because you have to gown up. So the nurses to patient touches goes down. You don't want this. And what we're doing next is mapping where they get it, how, and trying to understand how it's moving around the hospital. We know from the monthly data that there are spikes. One patient gets it, and then a bunch of patients get it. So trying to understand that transmission vector, and then hopefully understanding the environmental component of it. That might be architectural, HVAC systems, it may be cleaning regimens, and trying to understand that to reduce the incidence. All right, 4th wicked problem. By the year 2050, 10 million, according to JAMA, 10 million people per year will die due to multi-drug resistant bacteria. So quick history lesson. This is way out of my field, right? I'm an architect. But in 1910, the first antimicrobial drug was invented to treat syphilis. By 1948, there were already penicillin-resistant staphylococcus strains, and it became a global pandemic. By 1959, methicillin antibiotics were invented to combat this very same penicillin-resistant staphylococcus. And then, surprisingly, for a 30-year period from 1987 to 2017, there were no new antibiotic drug classes invented until 2017 when scientists found, and I don't even know how to pronounce it, teixeibactin, to destroy superbugs. All right, so what's the architectural...
Dust bunnies.
Oh,
they are in our homes, accumulating under our sofas and beds. But what exactly are they? Where do they come from? And what are they doing? We know dust matters to human health, but not all dust is the same. Research suggests that while some kinds of dust are linked with increased allergies and asthma, others can actually help prevent allergies and asthma. Still others may be linked to antibiotic resistance. So what makes these kinds of dust different? Dust bunnies are complex and include matter from both inside and outside the home, such as hair and skin from people and pets, insect remains, fiber from clothes or furniture, and bits of dirt. Dust is also home to a wide variety of microbes, like bacteria, fungi, and viruses, that come from both human and non-human sources. These microbial communities are surrounded by lots of different chemicals. These chemicals include antimicrobials in our soaps, plasticizers in our bottles, and flame retardants in our furniture and building materials. Basically, dust bunnies are ecosystems shaped by factors including who is around and what they're doing. What's in dust can also be affected by whether windows are open or closed, and by what kinds of products we bring into our homes. Every day we make choices that can affect what's in our dust. So what kind of dust is in your home?
All right, so I've got just a couple more slides. We just finished a 42 gyms, so we went to 40 gyms across the Northwest, and we found, we picked gyms because of increased respiration rates, a lot of vigorous activity, a lot of skin exposed, a lot of inhalation, right? So you can see this could be the perfect storm for exposure. We got a lot of exposed skin sloughing off, we've got a lot of cleaning, we got resuspension, and we got high inhalation, right? So that's why we chose to study gyms. And what we found was gyms that had increased antimicrobial compounds had also, we found, increased antibiotic resistance genes in those gyms. And then we couple that with the fact that we know it's at a high exposure zone. So the paper will be coming out soon, and I think the question is, from a design perspective, what kind of material choices we might make, what kind of skincare, and what kind of cleaning regimens we might consider differently in those facilities.
Should you go to the rec here?
You know, all of our gyms will remain anonymous. There are so these are four wicked problems, but I'll say they're related, and it's possible that we can only understand them or have a prayer of solving them if we understood them within the context of one another. And considering them from multiple perspectives, ergo the Institute for Health and the Built Environment. And this is just a really high-level, sort of frightening statistic that shows our healthcare spend relative to life expectancy. If anyone's seen this before, the U.S. is not tracking along with some of our counterparts, if you will, globally. We spend more and we're not living as long. So from a really, really broad cultural and community perspective down to an individual building, I think this is one building at a time in some regards. I believe humans' pathway to healthy, prosperous, and sustainable existence runs directly through the design and construction industry and building operations industry. I believe it's our professional responsibility to innovate in order to solve these challenges, these unintended fabrications of our design. As a community, as individuals, our health is impacted by the indoor and the urban environments in which we live, work, and play. And as humankind, our ability to conceive and achieve dramatically improved quality of life demands on imaginative designs and transformative scientific inquiry. So there's a really famous architect, his name is Neutra, from the 50s. He said, We should therefore be interested in all the non-visual aspects of our architectural environment. And I'll be the first to admit, architects often focused on the pretty pictures, right? That's important. And there's a lot of reasons why it's important. But it also needs to be fundamentally sound design and good places for our people and healthy for our planet. What's interesting, there's a book called missing. Mark, help me with the name of this book. There we go, the American Healthcare Paradox, right with me, that states that the vast majority of human health gains in the last decade have been due to environmental, economic, and social circumstances, not purely medical. So we need to bring these together. And lastly, I'll say we should accept this challenge professionally and scientifically and design the unseen. So I'll leave it there, and I'll just say one more word about this project. So in Design Studio, we have the chance to explore and innovate in a really safe student environment. We created an incredibly challenging project. So if anyone knows Portland, the South Waterfront, between OHSU and Zidell Yards, this is technically a 70-foot wide by 700-foot long strip of Zidell Yards. So Charlene Zidell was really helpful in our project here. She opened up their land and let us walk around and take pictures, and they have a master plan for redevelopment, part of the innovation quadrant, right? So the students got a 70-foot wide by 700-foot long little sliver of land, and their challenge was to design the world-class center for mental health. And it was all about experimental research and practice, translational medicine. They broke into teams. This is one team's scheme, and they chose to focus specifically on seasonal affective disorder in the Northwest. Today, notwithstanding, we get a lot of gray winters, and the challenge for this was, how do we get a building that's starving for light in the high rises of OHSU that are planned around at 300 foot tall? How do they get a building up into the light? And so they built a tower scheme with a strong public engagement, you can see the base sets in, and there's a large amphitheater. The building itself is an experiment to treat different types of depression, but specifically seasonal affective disorder. They did a lot of research together with some of our other collaborators on the best places in the building for certain types of uses to happen. In the basement with sensory deprivation to the sun deck on the top. They call their scheme Solturum, which is Latin for sun tower. And it's all wood, and it's 350 feet tall. So there we go. All right. So with that, I'd love to entertain any questions or clarifications.
Are there questions?
I didn't compel one question out of this group. I'm sure there must be.
I think everyone's still just running through the dust.
Well, I'd like to know more about your students. Is this for graduate students only?
Yeah, this is a graduate student design problem. So in architecture, it follows in a way sort of a studio, like an art-based studio curriculum, but we balance that with a lot of technical courses. And so this is an example where it's a design problem that we created that they design a solution for, and they had lots of drawings and other representation techniques. This is just one piece of what they built. And you can see a scale person is, right down here, these little dots. And then, the science comes in through some of the other coursework that we might pair with it with regards to structure and how does this stand up, or egress, how do people get in and out of it, life safety, how does it not burn down, thermal comfort, visual comfort, acoustics. So those are some of the ways we bring those technical challenges to the problem, and then they also have to create a scheme that is beautiful, perceived to be healthy and a great place to live, work, and play.
And do you have connections with a lot of different architecture firms who have the need for this type? Will your students typically go on to work for an architecture firm?
Yeah.
So what's your connection to the professional world?
I would say students of our institute or the labs in history, they go to a few different places. They may go to a consulting practice for sustainability, since we turn out a A lot of our students have become educators at other universities. In fact, U of O's architecture program has the largest number of educators in building science at other universities around the country. And then, of course, a good number of them will go to practice and work for an architecture firm. Some of our students get hired by engineering firms to liaise with architecture firms, especially folks that have come from our labs with a little more technical background. And then some of them go to work for national research labs. They get on fire. I mean, I'm an example of that in a way. I thought I'd be an architect, and I became a building scientist, and now I'm an academic. Yeah. Over here.
So,
and
yeah.
then,
Do you market any of your projects, services, and so forth for commercial results? And also, how do you get your partners? Do they come to you? Do you go out and solicit various pieces that would make this a better project?
Sure. So the first question was about how do we market our work. So the lab's about a $2 million a year enterprise, or the Institute. About a third of that is University of Oregon supported for faculty salaries. We've been, some of the labs have been around a long time, so there's a wonderful institutional support. In my opinion, it's the best job in the country. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And then 2/3 comes from grants, contracts, and giving. And any given year that changes. So we do some contract work. In fact, SRG contracted with us for the design of the new Multnomah County Courthouse, for example, and we did some really targeted work there. What we are always careful of is that because we do have some of our funding from the state, we never compete with private sector. In fact, the industry consortium is a way to make that a lot easier. Those organizations who might want to work with us, they give us a gift. They join the Institute, and we can do some really quick work with them. And then if it's going to be substantial amount of work, then we'll separate and use the university contracting process. The second question?
Yeah, well, I was wondering about your partners. Do you solicit these partners? Do they come to you?
A little bit of both. And, again, one of the things that attracted me to Oregon is the 10-year history in biology and the 30-year history with energy studies labs. So these labs have been established and are known. But we're definitely actively seeking partners, both through our grant-making process, looking for expertise that we need to flesh. What's great is we're a bunch of architects that have a lot of applicable opportunity. So we're just so excited about finding, Chris Minson here in physiology, or, Jessica Green in biology, or Dr. Kirale and Martindale in surgery at OHSU. That pairing has been really productive so far. Is, hey, we do buildings, what do you do? Because everything you do touches buildings. Yeah.
So if we were to identify one solvable problem in the built environment that Oregon is poised to solve the next few years, what's coming out of your group or your lab that would really help us sort of solidify our position in this interdisciplinary field?
Yeah.
As a promoter of health, wellness, sustainability, whatever, pick your DV of choice. What's sort of emerging as sort of a solvable problem?
So I think when to pick one is tough.
Give me three.
Yeah, I'll give you three. So, and I'll riff on some of the themes I brought up. I think, we've been winning in the energy. We know we've helped innovate. Charlie's work has helped establish what does it mean to design a net zero energy building. And that has trickle effects that also touch back to human health with regard to reduction of fossil fuel-based energy production. So there is one of our deepest strengths. I think my deepest background is in indoor light and daylight, and health and productivity associated with that. And so I think, building from those two strengths, we're going to take that next step into this, how do we solve C. diff? If we can understand C. diff, we can understand a lot about other transmission and dispersal of bacteria and viruses indoors. Is it a solvable problem? First, we're trying to define the playing field, but I think it's one that we're winning in. The biology work that Jessica established over the last 10 years is world class. And I think we're winning in that area. And I'd say a deviation on that is this antimicrobial compounds and antibiotic resistance. There's a lot of momentum in the field, too, which means if we can provide some leadership, people are starving for this information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Kevin? There are a couple of timber products people here on the board. Kevin, you probably know that.
More of that, yes.
for a building like the model that you have there, which is, I don't remember how tall you said it was, but
350 feet, yeah.
Yeah. Is it clear what the structural integrity of those wood products are that are going into that? Is that well established?
So code just passed within the last 6 months. The International Building Code just allowed wood structures up to 18 stories. And so some of the big concerns have been structural integrity and fire. Those problems have largely been solved. This is a pretty innovative structure, and while we worked with our structural engineering faculty in our Department of Architecture to get it in the right direction, I'm sure it's at the very early stages and would need continued refinement. But yeah, we have this we could figure this out, and I think more traditionally it would be post and slab type construction that looks a lot like the way concrete buildings have been built, but instead of concrete, it's out of mass timber. So these cross-laminated timber is one of the really innovative technologies that we're building plants here in Oregon, mass plywood panels with Ferreris lumber. D.R. Johnson is doing cross-lam. So cross-lam is you take 2-inch nominal by 8-inch nominal, you stack them 8 feet wide, you stagger them in a long row up to 60 feet long, and then you cross that and come in another direction, and then you cross it again. So 8 feet wide by 60 foot long sticks that are 3-ply, 5-ply, 7-ply, so they might be this thick up to this thick, that can act in many ways like a concrete slab, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I just want to add, it's wonderful having you here. Great presentation. This is a really cool example about something that Oregon does really well. So Kevin's an architect, but I can hear engineering stuff in his voice. He's dealing with a biologist. The biologist that he references, Jessica Green, actually has a PhD in nuclear engineering from Berkeley, but a chair in biology at Oregon because she has over 10 years sort of switched allegiance, and they work with other biologists. And I think that kind of combination of work on the science front isn't common at every university, and it's really wonderful, and it's a great example. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. If I might piggyback on that, just for why is it different here? And I'll say it's different here in some regards because we're not the land grant with engineering and ag. And some of the typical, I don't want to call it silos because that sounds pejorative, but the momentum that gets built up sometimes around these kinds of disciplines, there's so much momentum in these really specific areas that's what we do, that's what we do well, that's what we're going to do. Here, what we do well is innovation, which I think is wonderful.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I guess we'll get you back.
Thank you all. Happily come back. I left some cards here if anyone is interested in tracking me down. I'm sure there are other ways as well. So thanks for your time.
And thank you to your colleagues for joining you. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to, for the first time, hear from Bob Goldberg. I thought oh yes, Bob is here. Please come up and join us. I don't know how many of you have met Bob, but he is the head of the night campus. And thanks for the advanced reading, Bob. I think we all read that and said, wow, here's somebody who landed going at Mach 2. It looks terrific. And once again, I think one thing that really struck me about the presentation is how aggressively Bob has linked the night campus to a variety of companies and other institutions through his board and other advisors so quickly. So welcome, Bob. Bob's wife is also working with the university and brings an extensive background at Georgia Tech of working in the space between the university and businesses. So we think we got a good deal here with both of you. So welcome.
Thank you, Chuck. What he's not telling you is he told me that he was really excited about me coming, but he was even more excited about my wife coming to the University of Oregon. So we're both very, very pleased to be here. It's pleasure to give my first update on the Knight Campus project. This move was really, both professionally and personally, a wonderful move for Tina and I, and we're very, very thankful for the incredibly warm welcome that we've gotten. I really can't imagine a more warm welcome that we've received from our colleagues. I've moved my research program here, so I had a 22-year career at Georgia Tech, and that's been quite an undertaking to move here after all those years. But my temporary lab is set up in Pacific. We're moving our research grants here, and we've even gotten a few experiments going, so that's exciting. I will mention that, very briefly, that with my move, the University of Oregon has joined two very important national consortia. One is funded by the Department of Defense on regenerative medicine therapies for wounded warriors, and another is funded by the National Science Foundation on cell manufacturing, including cancer immunotherapies, which the goal there is basically to develop the manufacturing technologies to reduce the cost of making cell therapies and make them more widely available. So we're now partners in both those consortia through the work in my laboratory. It's been a great onboarding process, which I've been going through for the last few months. I arrived in August. I was trying to estimate how many new people I'd met with, and I lost count at well over 200. I think that's probably a conservative estimate. But I've really, through all those conversations, have really gathered that there's just tremendous excitement and support for the Knight campus, and that's been great to learn. I'm especially grateful to the president and to the provost and their teams for their support in my first few months. And I particularly want to give a special thanks to Patrick Phillips, who was the executive director, the acting executive director prior to my arrival, as well as the rest of the leadership team for their visioning and early plans. There's a lot to do, but I'm not coming in at the very beginning, and I have to say that they laid a tremendous foundation for success, and I'm grateful for that. I've also been doing a lot of traveling around the state. I've had the pleasure to meet with many key statewide partners, including several times Brian Drucker, who I'm sure you know is the director of the Knight Cancer Institute. I've spent some time with Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, who I was surprised to learn through talking to her that she and I grew up about a mile apart in a small town in southeastern Michigan. Went to Oregon State University and spent some time with their Dean of Engineering, Scott Ashford, and of course several leaders at Oregon Health Sciences University, including their new president, Danny Jacobs. And I can tell you through all these conversations, there's really great interest and excitement, as you'd expect, to connect with the Knight campus and forge new interinstitutional collaborations. And part of that, I think, is a recognition that by working together, we have a real chance, by becoming more externally facing, to compete more effectively for federal dollars, both in terms of innovation and research. So today I'm going to run through some of the basics of the Knight campus, just as a reminder of the governance structure, the mission and the goals, and then talk about some of the things that we've been doing through this academic year and some of our aspirations for the future. Of course, I'm happy to be interrupted and answer questions along the way, and look forward to the discussion at the end. So going to the slides. Here you can see the mission of the Knight campus is not just science for science sake. It's science with the idea of advancing society through pushing innovations from the laboratory through to translation more quickly. In order to achieve this, the vision is to dramatically shorten the timeline between discovery and societal impact through world-class research, training, and entrepreneurship in a nimble scientific enterprise or ecosystem, if you will. And there are a number of goals that had been articulated through the initial visioning process for the Knight campus, and you can see these here. We are, as I'll mention in a few moments, going through a strategic planning process that I started in the spring, and so these are being refined, but I think these were certainly great goals to begin with, and many of them will be included in the final strategic plan, including redefining the modern research university by fostering world-changing research that's unfettered by the traditional academic boundaries. And this is, of course, recognizing that many of the interesting things to do and the new innovations are happening at the interface between traditional disciplines. To serve as the educational engine driving the new economy of Oregon, and this is already happening to some extent with some of the internship programs that have now become housed, administratively housed within the Knight campus. to transform student education through discovery-driven learning. And this is really recognizing that we need to bring in the understanding of the business aspects of science earlier on in the learning process, and also give our students hands-on learning opportunities. To engage the public in the excitement and creativity of the scientific research. We're already doing this to some extent. We co-hosted an event earlier this year with a speaker with the journalism school on how to communicate better by Randy Olson, who wrote a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist, which I think is a great book. To foster diverse perspectives and participation in scientific research, incredibly important, and to improve the health and well-being of the citizens of Oregon, the nation, and the world. So as I said, these goals are being refined through our strategic planning process, but I think this is a wonderful set of goals that were laid out by the leaders of the Night Campus effort. I'm of course not doing this alone. There's an incredible team that the president and the provost have put together to support the Night Campus effort. These include Jim Hutchison, who is a professor of chemistry and biochemistry. He's head of the educational programs, but Jim is really doing more than just that for the Night Campus. He's helping us on a number of different levels, including the internship program in our innovation aspects. Moira Kilty is Night Campus Associate Vice President and Chief of Staff. I think everybody on campus knows Moira, and I'm incredibly grateful that she's my right-hand person and knows how to get things done on campus. Andrew Nelson, one of the things that really I was impressed with when I came to interview for this position was that they had already made connections to the business school, recognizing that that was going to be incredibly important going forward in building a scientific enterprise that was going to translate discoveries more quickly. And so Andrew is a professor of management. He is Associate Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Innovation and heading our innovation programs within the Night Campus. I've also appointed 4 faculty fellows in the Night Campus. So this was a designation that didn't exist beforehand, but it's something that I used at Georgia Tech to recognize leaders that were contributing to our efforts. These 4 individuals continue to do a great deal for the Night Campus. Karen Gilliman was one of the original 3 faculty who pitched the idea to Phil Knight. She's a professor of biology and providing a lot of leadership on some of our faculty searches. Bill Cresco was also one of the original 3 that made the pitch, professor of biology. Bill is also the director of the Data Science Initiative, which is a parallel initiative out of the President's office that is independent but also overlapping a lot with the goals of the Night Campus. Darren Johnson, a professor of chemistry and biology, is director of the Material Science Institute. Darren is also one of the leaders of the master's internship program, and for that we've recognized him as a faculty fellow. And of course, Patrick Phillips, a professor of biology and was the acting director of the Night Campus and continues on as a special advisor to the president. So in my first semester, I've really focused on the strategic planning process and getting the faculty recruitment efforts off the ground. Patrick has continued on to help, particularly with the building plans. There's still, even though the building's going up, there are a lot of still decisions to be made in terms of architectural decisions and wayfinding and so forth. So Patrick is helping with that, leading that effort really. And he's also helping us to figure out some of the educational programs, both at the graduate and potentially at the undergraduate level. One of the first things I did even before I arrived, actually last spring, was to form an external advisory board to provide external input to the Night Campus as we were going forward. I was extremely pleased with the individuals that we had agreed to help us with this project. We have a great diversity of backgrounds and individuals on this board. It's a mix of academics and industry people, but a little heavier on the academic side, with a focus on individuals that have either started efforts, either interdisciplinary research efforts or academic programs, and a lot of entrepreneurs on this list as well. Many of these individuals are National Academy members. Some of them, Christy Anseth in the top right corner, is actually a member of all 3 National Academies. So just an incredibly great group of people that are providing input. We've already had our first external advisory board meeting this fall, and they're providing input to our strategic planning process. We also have an internal advisory board, and this was formed before I came on board, although we have revised the board a little bit. And this is individuals that are effectively the de facto faculty members of the Knight campus until we recruit in our own faculty members, and are continuing to provide advice to the Knight campus as well as serving in a number of different roles, including some of our governance committees, which are shown here. And so in fiscal year 19, these are the internal advisory board committees and working groups that we are already set up and are working. So these include the Tenure Track Faculty Personnel Committee, Inclusion, Diversity, and Outreach Committee, the Tenure Track Faculty Professional Responsibilities Committee that's basically determining things like teaching loads and things like that for the Knight campus. There's a building user group which has been very active. It's becoming a little bit less active now, but that's is led by Patrick Phillips. The Competitive Proposal Review Committee, which is an ad hoc committee reviewing any funding that we provide from the campus. And then the tenure-related faculty search committees. And those we have, as I mentioned in a minute, we have 2 faculty searches going on, and those are filled with both internal advisory board and non-internal advisory board members. As I mentioned, the other thing that I did in addition to forming the external advisory board is I started a strategic planning process in the spring. To do this, because I wasn't actually physically on campus yet, I thought it was a good idea to hire a company that I had worked with previously on a roadmap for cell manufacturing called Nexite to facilitate the process of our strategic planning. And as part of that, we've contracted with them to conduct 3 workshops, 2 of which have already been held. So one of those workshops was with a broad group of people across the University of Oregon campus, and we had 35 internal stakeholders participate in that in September 2018. Prior to that workshop, actually, they had conducted 30 interviews with stakeholders, both internal to the university and across the state, and that fed information into the first workshop. We then had a second workshop with the external advisory board members in October, and the final report from the consulting group will be completed in early 2019. I actually expect it to be done by February 2019. And we will then have a third workshop, and our plans actually have revised a little bit. I think what we're going to do with that third workshop now is to use it as one where we bring in companies as well as innovators from the outside and do a workshop on innovation and industry engagement. And that is likely to happen in March or April of 2019. So just a little update on the building. My office is actually right next to the building site, so I get to see the progress every day, and it's pretty amazing to see how fast this thing is going up. But it's really a spectacular building that has been planned for Franklin Avenue, I think Franklin Boulevard. One of the things that's really great about it is it's right next to the existing science complex, and I think you all know we'll have a bridge actually over Franklin Boulevard that will connect to the existing facilities. But this is a $225 million building, 160,000 square feet. We have space in the building for 24 faculty units that would have an average of 6 people. So if you had a larger lab of 12 people, then that would take 2 of those spots, but 24 nominally with 6 individuals each. So research laboratories, a lot of shared core facilities, which is something that I did a lot at Georgia Tech. It's an incredibly efficient way for us to supply cutting-edge instrumentation to faculty in a cost-effective manner. A lot of these pieces of equipment cost millions of dollars, and you wouldn't want them to be in just individual labs. And so we set them up as core facilities available to everybody. And the core facilities that we set up are not going to just be available to the Knight campus. They'll be available to everybody at the University of Oregon. There will be leasable labs and office and an innovation center, and so this is something I'm very excited about. Instead of having an incubator space, off campus somewhere, it's actually going to be fully embedded in the Knight campus building, including some office space next door for business support type people And so this is all about greasing the skids and making it easier for the innovations to get out the door and result in either startups or potentially licensed technology. And then we've got some really great flexible teaching environments set up for both science and engineering, including teaching labs where students will get hands-on experience built into the building. This is the building timeline that you can see here, and I won't go through the details on this, but just suffice to say that everything is on track, on schedule for a move-in it says summer 2020. I'm hoping it'll be spring 2020, but everything looks good in terms of the construction of the building, in terms of its timing. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Night Campus Internship Program, and this is something that's been going on at the University of Oregon for quite some time, although it was spread out into a number of different areas and now has been consolidated with an administrative home within the Night Campus. I'm really excited about this master's program because it really meets a lot of needs. It's designed to create master's programs with an integrated internship in areas that are of interest to companies, to industry, that are of interest to students, of course, because there's a job involved, and are also of interest to the faculty here. So it basically takes all three of those things happening to form a new track within this internship program. The students come in and they get a rapid sort of immersion training in coursework, and then they go off and do a 9-month internship. It is tuition generating, but the students' internship pays for the tuition that they're paying, so they end up for them financially it's an excellent deal. And you can see here the 4 existing tracks that are available for this master's internship program. I'm happy to say that a 5th track in molecular sensors was just approved by the graduate committee, I believe, last week, and so we'll be offering that beginning in summer 2019. So I think this is a great program. You know, not every student that we bring through the graduate program is going to want to do a PhD. And for those that want to get some graduate training that's industry relevant and go out and get a job, this is a fantastic, very efficient program. We've already had some discussions with the Honors College about potentially creating a 4+1 or 3.5+1 program that would allow those students to go through and get a master's program. So we're excited about that as well.
Bob, where will they have their 9-month internships?
So out in the companies.
Are these Portland area or?
Some of them are. A lot of them are in Oregon, but not all of them. Okay. And so the staff that run this, Stacy York and Stacy Wagner, along with the faculty that run these programs, have done a terrific job getting industry involved in this. I attended their sort of matching day earlier this fall, where the companies come in and the students give testimonials, and then they do interviews. The companies do interviews with the interns at that point. Mm-hmm. And I believe their numbers are 90% or so immediately match, and then there's about 10% they have to continue to match over time. But yeah, a lot of them are in Oregon, but certainly not all of them. And of course, career acceleration is going to be an important point of the Night Campus. The Master's Internship Program is one example of that. Another example that is really great, and I've already begun participating in, is a Lens of the Market program that has been supported by the Materials Science Institute. Going forward, it's going to be supported by the Night Campus. David Conover and I just had a meeting last week, and he offered to offer some support from the Vice President of the Research Office as well. And so this is a program designed to take students that are interested in entrepreneurship and considering innovation and go through a training process where they think about the market first, rather than developing research and doing technology development and then looking for an application, thinking about the market first and then going back and saying, all right, what are solutions to that market problem? And so I think this is a fantastic program that I'm happy to continue to support and hopefully expand in the future. As I mentioned earlier, also, science communication is extremely important. We co-hosted with the Media Center for Science and Technology in the School of Journalism and Communication a workshop by Randy Olson on science communication recently. Along the education track also, we've been talking about a biomedical engineering graduate program. So as you all know, University of Oregon does not have engineering. I am a biomedical engineer, and I want to have biomedical engineering graduate students here at the university. And so we're exploring different options of introducing a graduate program through the night campus. When I was at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, I arrived there in 1996, and we soon thereafter formed a partnership with Emory University to have a joint program in biomedical engineering, with the idea being that we would bring together the engineering with the medical to create a great program. And during the time I was there, I saw that partnership, though it has its challenges, really thrive, and that's now, depending on whether you're looking at graduate or undergraduate, the number 1 or number 2 program in the country. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for us to work together across the state on this. Oregon Health Sciences University, in addition to them having the medical school that we don't have, we have a lot of things that they don't have. They don't have a business school. They don't have undergraduate sciences. And so there's a lot of motivation on their side to also work with us. The Dean of Engineering at Oregon State University is also very interested. And so we're exploring what a joint program might look like. You can imagine there's a number of challenges that would be associated with that, but also a lot of great advantages in terms of being nationally relevant and recruiting great students and great faculty to those programs. And so right now we're still in discussions. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have all 3 institutions on board with moving forward with this within the next month or so. And there's also other aspects of the growing Oregon Health Sciences University collaboration. You know, I committed to this position in October 2017, I think, and of course had been here several times before doing that. But the first next trip I took was up to Portland to meet with people at Oregon Health Sciences University. I have several colleagues there that I've collaborated with for years, but I knew that was going to be a very important relationship. And of course, others here on campus already know that and have already been working on that. And so I'm really pleased to see that there's a collaborative research seed project that is being funded already, and nothing to do with the night campus. This is bringing together collaborators from the 2 institutions. And I attended their event earlier this fall, and there's some really great collaborations going on between the institutions there. There's also joint adjunct academic appointments that are happening. I believe there's one true joint appointment between University of Oregon and OHSU. I now have adjunct appointments in their biomedical engineering department as well as their Center for Regenerative Medicine. I already mentioned that there's a proposed biomedical engineering graduate degree program. And also we're pretty deep into discussions about a joint center for biomedical data science that would be a joint effort between the Knight Cancer Institute, the Knight campus here, and the Data Science Initiative here. And that program would involve recruiting an eminent scholar, basically, to serve as the director between the 2 institutions and having associate directors at each campus. In terms of programming, we're moving fast on getting programming going as well. We had our first annual Distinguished Lecture Series, so the idea behind this is to bring a very notable speaker, National Academy, leaders of industry, Nobel Prize winners, et cetera, to campus. We had our first one last spring. We had Stephen Gillette, who's CEO of Chronicle, Google's cybersecurity moonshot. We're talking potentially about next year of doing sort of a home-and-home series with Oregon Health Sciences University and the Knight Cancer Institute there. And since we don't have a building now, we may do our next distinguished lecture next fall up there, and then in 2020 do it back here. We also hosted this fall an innovation panel in November, and this was to kick off the planning of an innovation seminar series that will start next year. And for that innovation panel, myself as well as 3 other individuals from U of O that have started companies had a panel discussion. It really brought me back to when I started at Georgia Tech many years ago, when I was asking a room of people who had started companies, because I had the opportunity to start a company as a graduate student, and so I had already done one. And it was very similar response here. There were sort of 3 or 4 hands that went up, one person going kind of like this. And after 15 years at Georgia Tech, half the room would be raising their hands. And I think that's what we'll see here too. It's a cultural change. It's going to take time. It's going to take resources. It's going to take bringing people in that have done it before. But I think we'll see that change happen here as well. We've also provided STEM student support, about $81,000 the last 2 years. We've worked quite a bit with David Conover's office on shared equipment purchasing. So we've used some resources from the night campus to upgrade our animal facilities here, which are very important for translational work and something I do a lot in my work. We've also partnered on 2 Murdoch proposals, one of which was already funded and one of which is going in now. And also, we've started a program that I'm very passionate about called the Night Campus Undergraduate Scholar Program. And this is designed to provide undergraduates with a significant year-long research experience where they work 10 hours a week in a research lab during the academic year and then full-time over the summer. It's a competitive program, so it attracts great undergraduate students, and it works well for the faculty as well since they get great students for a full year. And so we had committed to funding 3 of these out of the night campus. Thermo Fisher has tentatively agreed to fund 2 more of them already, and so we hope to fund 5. We had nearly 20 applications already from students and 6 projects submitted from labs. And so we'll get that off the ground in January, and that's something I hope to significantly scale up over the coming year. In terms of faculty recruiting, this is probably, we actually had a faculty recruit in today, and he asked me, how are you going to define success in 5 years? And there's a lot of things you can think about in terms of metrics, but the bottom line comes down to recruiting great people, and so we're pushing hard on the recruiting front. We don't have a building to put them into yet, so as Moira says, we're going to be stuffing them into my lab, but that's okay temporarily until we get the building up. But we have 2 searches going on. One is an open rank search that's in a sort of a broad number of areas, including bioengineering, regenerative medicine, applied science, computational science, and genomics. And we had 240 applicants for that job posting. We're down to 5 finalists for that and expect to make 2 offers out of that search. We had a number of people in there that were really terrific science people. The quality was really high, but they didn't necessarily meet the translational sort of engineering and applied science mission of the night campus. And so we've taken several of those and pushed them out into other searches across campus, and hopefully that will lead to some additional hires there. And then I'm very pleased that the President's been very supportive in bringing in additional resources that have allowed us to start some high-end searches, one of which was from the DeArmond Foundation, which provided funding for an endowed chair. And the DeArmond Foundation was interested in neurosciences and the night campus, so we combined those 2 things, and we're doing an endowed chair search in neuroengineering, which I'm sure you've all heard of the brain mapping initiative, for example. Technologies to map brain activities, brain computer interfaces, robotics, et cetera, are all areas that may play into this area. And that search is at a little bit earlier stage. We have the search committee together, and as you know, for more senior searches, it's more of a targeted type search where we're going out and trying to find great candidates. Just a quick note about the financial model for the night campus, because it's a pretty unique, in my experience, it's a pretty unique model. Obviously, this was an incredibly generous gift from Phil and Penny Knight that has made this possible. But the President has directed us that everything out of the night campus has to be funded from the interest derived from the endowment dollars after the costs for the building go into place. So this is a challenge. I'll have to say this is really a challenge to do this because the building is approximately half of the gift money. Not all the gift money is here at one time, as I'll show you. And so, cash flow is something that we're having to pay attention to while we're trying to push these programs and recruiting as fast as we can. So that's just a long way of saying, it's important that we continue to work towards bringing in additional resources that are going to allow this to be successful. Here you can see the night campus budget so far. So the commitment is for $500 million and $50 million increments over 10 years. And so you can see that two of those increments have come in. There's been some additional gifts from the DeArmond Foundation that I mentioned for $10 million commitment, as well as Lori Loki, who has committed an additional $10 million. And so those are helping us to, as I said, to push forward more quickly with some of the senior hires. some additional minor philanthropy, and then, of course, the state committed a very impressive $70 million towards the Capitol building project, which is absolutely critical towards completing the building. So happy to answer any other questions on the budget, but that's where we stand right now with that. Mentioned already this additional philanthropy from the DeArmond Foundation and Lori Loki, and as well as from Thermo Fisher. In addition to the undergraduate scholars, they provided a $100,000 gift for increasing inclusion and diversity in the master's program. So that's about it. I'm really excited about our progress. I'm actually, I think we've made fantastic progress. But at the same time, I'm impatient about moving even faster. And so we're looking to do that. I think one of the things I've realized is I'm very confident that we're going to meet our goal of accelerating scientific discoveries through translation. I'm less confident that we can accelerate building construction timelines. But, I have to say I'm really happy that we're on time, and the capital management team here at the University of Oregon has done a fantastic job moving that project along. It's really exciting to see it coming out of the ground, and really exciting to think about the ability to implement these programs and faculty recruitments that we're working on now. So happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for Bob? Mike, do you want to add anything to what you've heard?
No, I've been delighted by Bob's progress and by his the way he's integrated into the university, and also the connections to OHSU, which I think have been really terrific. And thinking about both on the research side, which this was really conceptualized as a research program, but also now we're thinking very seriously about new degrees, both at the graduate level and the undergraduate level. And in thinking through the financial model that we've discussed, and it is challenging because of the way the timing is working out. Ultimately, as the Knight campus begins teaching undergraduates and generating tuition for the university, then we'll go back and think about how it's funded in terms of funded like a normal department here with those resources. But at the moment, when it's as a research institute, it needs to be on its own bottom.
Thanks for this great presentation. It's exciting to see how things are shaping up, beyond the construction phase. In thinking about our collaboration and partnership with OHSU, I'm struck by the multitude of opportunities that we have here as a campus, particularly research and clinical training that involves human subjects. So, of course, that's my jam. What role, if any, do you see the Knight campus playing in either undergraduate or graduate education that prepares a workforce to engage in clinical trials research, either at OHSU, other medical schools, other research institutes here? That seems to be something that perhaps is currently lacking, but potentially a wonderful opportunity to meet a need across both of our institutions. And maybe it's outside of the scope of the Knight campus, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, I agree with you. It's a great need. I think it's very early days in thinking about undergraduate curriculum. Mm-hmm. We are actually putting together course descriptions and things like that, and we'll be talking to the president soon about a proposed degree program.
Great.
But I agree with you. I think, when you talk to companies, they want more of that. They want students coming out that are understanding more about business principles, regulatory processes, compliance, communication, ethics, all that. And so, the challenge is balancing those really incredibly important aspects into the education program while maintaining the rigor and depth in whatever you're offering. And so, but we're certainly going to be thinking about that. I think certainly, you might think about within an undergraduate program creating a track or a specialty or a certification in collaboration with OHSU that is designed to their needs and would lead to something employment on the back end. So that's a great idea.
So welcome to town. We're just thrilled to have you here, finally. And just want to say one of the things that's been exciting over the last 2 years has been the interest and intrigue, the curiosity, the cheerleading, the support, everything, every positive word I can say from community. And this is an incredible opportunity to break down the walls and continue to talk with and among the community. So I hope that all of that outreach that's happened by virtue of not having a building that's insular to keep going out and translating it into 8th grade English and that sort of thing. The city manager has established a committee 18 months ago to say, how do we get ready for when you're ready to do something 3 to 5 years down the road. So their arms are open, I think, ready to embrace you. So
yeah, thank you. Communicating what we're doing and being more externally facing is really important. I actually was spending time at an event up in Portland at a holiday event, and the OHSU president, Danny Jacobs, walked in, and we had a very nice 30-minute conversation. And that's part of what we were talking about, was being more externally facing and connecting to the community and so forth. I think that's already happening to some extent, and Eugene, in many ways, reminds me of Ann Arbor, where I did all my training, where the incredible interest from the community. And we're seeing it in, the pub talks. Jim Hutchison does a chemistry of beer talk that had a great turnout. We started, and this was before I came, so I don't take any credit, but there's a seminar series called Science Night Out that is connected to the community. And I'm a little scared because I'm the speaker for the spring, and David McCormick attracted, I think, 700 people from the community, which I have no hope to do, but I think that's been a great...
Do you have a dog that's fluffy?
I do have a dog. It's not as fluffy as his dog, but yeah. Is his dog the one that should get credit for the 700 people?
No, but he was a guest, participant.
His dog is famous, yeah. So, yeah, there's an incredible amount of interest from the community. I even had a judge in town asked to come meet with me and want to talk about, ethics and getting involved in what's going on in the night campus. So that's great to see, and I fully embrace it.
And just to play on that, the same, taking it up to Portland, being able to leverage off the popularity and actually just OHSU's being well known in the community. So it provides such credibility immediately to be partnering with OHSU. You get that audience, you get the focus, you get a lot more people coming to events, lectures, etc., because of that connection that they might not otherwise come from just U of O because of lack of familiarity. So terrific opportunities there.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree. We just need that high-speed rail.
Yep.
Anything else for Bob? Okay, Bob, thank you very much. Great presentation. Keep after it. All right. I think we've come to the end of our regular agenda, unless there is any other business anyone wants to introduce. You've had enough of this for today.
Well, they're not actually allowed to do that either.
You've trained them too well.
I know in California you can't talk about anything on the agenda.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, aye. Thank you. Good meeting.